Do you want me to start with the
Sorry.
sex scene?
No, do
Oh
not start with
no.
a sex scene. Do not, because
Hey, I don't know.
I've got my own. I've got my. Okay, I actually. We don't have to insert podcast, but I actually kind of like the idea of reading the copyright law thing at the top. I feel like that kind of sets the tone. It set the tone for the book for me in a sort of way. Do you mind if
I
I do
like
that?
this. I like this. Go for it. Yeah.
It
Okay.
is like a peculiarity of
Hmm.
his.
Let's see. I say to hell with them. You bought it, you own it. I believe in copyright laws guaranteeing of ownership in your books. So you own this ebook. The license agreement, see below, is from Creative Commons and it gives you even more rights than you get to a regular book. Every word of it is a gift, not a confiscation. Enjoy. What do I want from you in return? Read the book. Tell your friends. Review it on Amazon or at your local bookseller. Bring it to your book club. Assign it to your students. Older students, please. That sex scene is a scorcher. Now I've got your attention, don't I? As Woody Guthrie wrote, this song is copyrighted in US under seal of copyright 154085 for a period of 28 years, and anybody caught singing it without our permission will be mighty good friends of ours because we don't give a darn. Publish it, write it, sing it, swing to it, yodel it. We wrote it. That's all we wanted to do. And that's at the very top of this book, and I gotta say, I agree up to a point. I will say that our podcast is highly proprietary. You listening to this, you actually owe us money. But you do have to leave us a review legally. That's actually a legal
I
requirement.
am coming around with a sock full of pennies, and I'm going to ask you to fill it.
Socialist shelf. Be good, goods, and organize yourself. Socialist shelf. Be good, goods, and organize yourself.
You're now listening to Socialist Shelf Radio.
Welcome to the Socialist Shelf, coming to you live from, this week in America. I, as always, am Lenore. I'm here with Jacob. We have a guest tonight. Max Graves, the cartoonist for What Happens Next, has come on to discuss, what are we discussing?
Makers, Cory Doctorow. Welcome to the show, Max. Appreciate having you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I will say right out of the gate that I have been pronouncing it Doctorow this entire time, which is it's entirely possible that's wrong, but I'm warning you now that I am going to keep saying it like that.
You're
We've
allowed to do that.
actually,
I
we've
checked it
actually,
just before the episode. I literally was like, wait a second. Is it Dr. Rao or Doctoro? And I literally like went online and like listened to I checked a couple interviews with him and they do introduce him as Doctoro. I
Damn.
think he'll be given his like whole ideology of like free and open use and all that. I think he's probably fine with you saying Dr. Rao. I don't think
Yeah.
he's coming for you.
his
Yeah,
name
I'm
is
creating a
Creative.
derivative remix of his last name.
In a lot of ways, it's sort of a Creative Commons situation.
I think we each came with like a different pronunciation of his surname, so you're in good company, Max.
Lenore, what were you coming with?
Oh, Doctorow.
Okay, there we go. Well, what happens next is a great web comic. I love that you're like four pillars you have set up, Max. It's let me see, it's the aftermath of a murder, posting on the internet, the Midwest, and being gay and trans. Am I right about those? Those are the
Yeah,
four
those are my
pillars.
four pillars, which is funny. I only wrote that about page very recently because I don't know, I just like felt like I should have one. I wanted a place to put all my like social media links.
Hmm.
And then I was like, well, I should probably have something here that sums up the comic in case people are running across it and have no idea what it was. And I was just like, the comic can be a little bit difficult to summarize. So I was like, what are the main points that I think people should know before getting into it? And
Love that.
that was what I pulled out.
Yeah, I only just recently got into your comic. We met on a sort of a Discord server, and we got mentioned in there, and I got to reading it. I really enjoy it, and we'll definitely Definitely would encourage people to check it out, and I'm gonna link it here in the show notes. But we definitely appreciate you coming on, and you brought this book as one of the possible ideas of something we could talk about. So I'm curious, why Makers? Why was this a book that interested you? Before we get into the author bio here.
Yeah. It is like a book that I was really into Doctorow in high school. I read a lot of his stuff. I think I started with Little Brother, his YA novel, and then I kind of
Hmm.
went from there. And Makers in specific really grabbed me because of a couple of different things. I don't know. It's funny. I'm not a tech person like Doctorow is, but I am very much a creature of the internet. And there was something like really exciting to me about sort of the dream that Makers presents of the internet and technology being able to like break down these barriers and unite people and enable people to like collaborate on projects and do new things.
Hmm.
And in a lot of ways, I think that that's a dream that is if not dead, I feel a little bit more cynical, well, a lot more cynical really about the internet and its possibilities than I did when I was a teenager.
So
But
does
I,
Corey from when he wrote this book. I've read his blog recently.
yeah,
He's also gotten a little more cynical. Let's say the dream's not dead. Let's call it delayed. How about that?
delayed, yeah. Right, because he wrote Makers, I believe, back in 2009.
Published
Let
in
me
2009. That's right.
Yeah. So he wrote it before that even, and the internet was just a totally different creature in like the early to mid 2000s than it
Hmm.
is now, almost midway through the 2020s. The other thing that I have in common with Doctor Who interest wise is that I'm also a theme park nerd.
Let's
Uh
go.
and that's something that like he that recurs a lot in his work and like Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom and
Yep.
stuff.
First novel. Yeah.
Yeah, and it just like tickles me the way that he includes all these little details about like the I don't know about fans of the parks and how they think about these things and like how I guess the suits think about things and like what draws people to theme parks and theme park fandom and to fandom generally, and then also the things that make it, kind of complicated and thorny.
Mm.
Um, and I guess I'll talk about that a little bit later because that's a lot of what I think is interesting about the book. And just like lastly, just his interest in like subculture, in like goths and hackers. I think that like I've always had a very sort of strong desire for community and to be a part of things. And I think that like that's a desire that's reflected in his work and a fantasy that's reflected in his work.
Mm. Yeah.
It's
Lenore, do you have any history with Cory Doctorow?
limited, right? I'm aware of the version of him that Randall Monroe presents in XKCD, with the
Okay.
like
Yeah.
the cape and like going around in the blimp or whatever, kind of a quirky internet sort of figure.
And he's
Um
dressed up as that since at like
he
cons and stuff
has.
like that. He's taken that in good humor for sure.
I
Yeah,
think it's
no,
his
as
Wikipedia photo.
it
Hmm.
is. Yes, yeah, I did look that up. But yeah, other than that, I had only read one other book of his, and it was actually the one immediately after this one for the win.
Okay.
The one where it's about gold farmers in the global south in like MMO spaces, right? And how they kind of organize and fight for their rights. It put me in mind of reading this book puts me in mind a little bit of Kim Stanley Robinson, right? Because he
Put a
has
pin in that, yes, because I've got some interesting information in the bio about Ken Stanley Robinson.
He does, yeah, and like where For the Win has sections where he will just Cory Doctorow will just turn to you and explain to you, the reader, the concept of arbitrage. Here he does it through his characters,
Hmm.
and I kind of like the For the Win mode of that a little bit more.
Okay. Well, I have no experience with his novels. However, I have read like the blog that he put out like when he was working with Boing Boing for a while. I read some of the tech stuff. I definitely caught his interview like forever ago when I was like listening to Adam Conover's podcast fairly regularly. Like so I've like encountered him a handful of times, but I've never read one of his novels before, interestingly enough. Though I've like come up against it. I think I may have read his one book that he contributed to about writing science fiction as well. Um, it's just one of those things like this guy that I've kind of run up to the edge on a few times, but have not really fully experience one of his novels. But I have a bit of a bio for him, and y'all may have some supplemental information or maybe not. But what I've got on him is interesting. And this is a living author. So, Cory, if you're listening to this, hello. I enjoy your work. Um, a lot of authors we're covering not living. So if they're listening, we won't ever know about it. Uh, 1971 was when he was born in Toronto, Canada. He's of Jewish descent. His family are all refugees from the Nazis, living in various places in Eastern Europe, but they all had to flee. And his father was actually born in a refugee camp in Azerbaijan. Um,
Wow.
his dad is a communist, avowed Trotskyist, and he was kind of raised in that tradition. Um, but he actually grew up in Toronto, Canada, though he would move around a bit later on. Um, this guy is very smart, but has a lot of trouble focusing. He's described by a lot of people as very manic, pacing, twitching, all that stuff. And it's no great surprise that he was a high school dropout. He dropped out of high school and he just immediately got the Canadian equivalent of a GED. I forget what that's called. Apologies to the Canadian listeners. Uh,
A CED, a
maybe
Canadian
so.
equivalency degree.
Maybe so. He attended multiple colleges. He never got a degree except his honorary degree, but he was attending multiple colleges, including online colleges in the 90s, which was not as easy to do. Um, and then he would go on to found some like free software companies and stuff like that. He was bouncing around. He was really interested in computers, very much a software guy, very interested in, Creative Commons stuff, very interested in open licensing, very interested in this like idea of the internet, like Max was talking about. This was part of why he moved to London and worked for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, helped establish the Open Rights Group, all of these things which were defending people's sort of rights to use and reproduce information on the internet. And he's writing all this time. He began writing as a teen and he sold his first story, Crap Hound, in 1998. That is still the name of his personal website, is Crap Hound. And his first novel was already mentioned on here, Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom, published in 2003 about a 22nd century magic kingdom. Max, have you read that one?
I have read Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom. Yeah. In fact, I believe that that's the one that I have a signed copy of from when I
Oh,
was 17.
Oh,
cool. Cool, cool. Did you meet him or you just like found a signed copy of it?
I did meet him briefly. Yeah.
Very
Um,
cool.
yeah, I gave him a little picture that I drew of Death Waits from Makers as well, who
yo.
uh and he signed that for me.
Oh
And
yeah.
I don't know. He seems like a nice guy. I do remember being shocked to learn at the time that his wife worked for Disney. I'll
Hmm.
probably bring that up again later, but uh I don't know.
Interesting
He's
intersection.
an interesting intersection, yeah.
Yeah. Around 2001, he begins working with Boing Boing blog, and he works there for 19 years. He's edits, writes a lot of tech stuff. Like I said, I encountered some of his stuff there. Um, and yeah, but Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom gets him on the sci-fi sort of scene. He immediately he wins a Locus Award. He's nominated for a Nebula. He continues to be successful with Someone Comes to Town, Someone Leaves Town, which is about dumpster diving, fantasy, and spreading Wi-Fi access. Um, he's got short stories and then Little Brother, which was mentioned earlier in 2008, which is about, I mean, it's about a variety of things. I know it has a lot to do with people defending their rights, information freedom. There's a terrorist attack. And Makers is 2009. In 2008, Little Brother was very, very successful, and that's around the time he's able to write full time as well. And yes, Makers releases in 2009, which is the book we're discussing. Um, and interesting thing about him, he coined the term "enshittification,"
Hmm.
which is about like the internet getting worse due to greed and whatnot. A thing that we're certainly kind of have already referred to. And he's shown up in some pop culture. He showed up in the video in the RPG Kingdom of Loathing. He's referenced in Ready Player One.
Oh.
Um, and
He's like the president of the internet or whatever.
some the president of
Yeah,
something.
he's the
Yeah.
president of, I don't know, the internet, and Will Wheaton is his vice president. That was a different time.
What do you
God.
know? Yeah. He's had a few like minor careers as like a professor. Mostly he's just worked and done digital rights stuff. He lived as a British citizen for a while, then left London, lived in LA, lived in Canada. He still publishes on the blog pluralistic.net. And it's a very old-fashioned blog, no ads, no whatever. Very simple white background text. Um, and he's got some good stuff. Like I just pulled a quote from him from like a very recent, very like a fairly recent interview or a thing he wrote, which I thought was interesting and also fairly timely. And this will give you a bit of an idea of his politics. Quote, and this is just, from his blog. Quote, the right's ideology holds that if you're starving and I'm incinerating a bunch of bread that would save your life, my property right to my bread trumps your right to not starve to death. That may seem extreme, but every time you pass a shivering unhoused person in a city where apartments or houses are being left empty by speculators waiting for their value to appreciate, you're living through a right-wing trade-off where the property right to a home as an asset trumps someone else's right to a home as a home. You can deplore starvation and recoil in horror from the prospect of someone dying of exposure on the streets of your city. But if you take the side of the owner of a vacant home over the right of the person sleeping on its doorstep, you're taking the side of property over human rights. You value both human rights and property rights. You simply value property rights more than human rights. So like that's just a quote I pulled from like a recent post of his. This is the way this guy talks. This is the way he thinks. He's a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. Not super surprising that this is, though I have like I'm a number of like, different disagreements on this or that issue. There's no doubt that especially compared to some of the other authors we've covered on this show, much more in line with, I think, how me and Lenore feel about the world than, say, I don't know, uh, the JD Vance episode where we covered
Yeah.
hillbilly elegy. But yeah, I'm interested in him, but he's just he's so tech focused. He's very interested in that stuff. Even still, even though he feels like the promise of the internet has degenerated some, he's defined. A lot of people say he's just his office is always cluttered with stuff. He's always fidgeting with things. He always like a little globes he's spinning. Just kind of a mad scientist figure from people who've met him. He's also like this guy who's like talking about how like we have to incorporate technology into everything we're doing. I mean, he says that he believes books are meant to be read with like Google next to you. When he writes books, a lot of times he does not define what a thing is because he's like, well, modern audiences can just search what that means. You might not like that, you might not like that, but it's like how he is. He's just like he is a writer for the modern era. And he wants to write to a modern audience. So he's an interesting guy. I'm definitely a little like further down the sort of like digital world than I am, and there's this different sort of has maybe more of a love of like tech and like science and all that in this sort of internet-y way. But definitely I think a pretty cool guy and set up a pretty interesting vision of what basically the near future, not really even a predictive book, barely like just sort of a sci-fi set in the like literally next month uh sort of setting here in Makers, though of course not all of it came to pass. It was supposed to feel very contemporary, very like this happens in the next 10 years.
Not all of it
Yeah.
came to pass, certainly, but sorry, Max, to go ahead.
Oh, what I was gonna say is I was listening to the Snow Crash episode of this podcast,
Oh,
Mm.
sure.
and I think somebody said something about like, he got a lot of facts wrong about the future to the extent that he was like, even trying to predict the future. Neil Stevenson when writing Snow Crash,
Yeah,
but he
Mhm.
got a lot of like the feeling of it right,
the
and
vibes, yeah.
that's definitely something that I feel in Makers and places where I'm like, oh, the vibes of this are correct.
Hmm.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like there's bits and pieces where he's like remarkably prescient about not only certain technologies, but like quirks thereof. Like there's a
Yeah.
bit where they're 3D printing gnomes from like an open source, and like there's generative AI that's creating gnomes with like extra arms and like extra eyes. And it's like, wow, where have we seen that before lately? Fucking
Nailed that
everywhere.
one.
Yeah.
No, yeah, he's remarkably he's remarkably prescient about certain things. Um, he's prescient about certain things, and there's also, I mean, we'll get into it, but it's almost like his characters. I feel like there's certain things that in tunneling on kind of leave you wondering, okay, well, how is the rest of the world interacting with these paradigms that he's building?
It's a bit
It's
diffuse.
yeah, it's diffuse, certainly. It's ambitious, and it's a little bit, as the author himself, it kind of hops around. I was texting Jacob the other night, like, yeah, I'm in the last 30 or so pages, and I'm wondering what we're building toward here. But like, the premise is
You're building towards a couple robots throwing a ball back and forth.
we're
That's what you're
building
building.
toward robots that themselves can build towards something.
The future is now, Lenore.
Yes, yes, it is, and we are it. So yeah, basically the premise is it's 20 minutes into the future, and
20 minutes into the future in the year 2009, right? So we're set in a alternate 2009.
yeah, 20 minutes into the future, into the past. Like there's blink and you miss it, like references to like the real estate financial crisis and whatnot, but
Mhm.
largely a point of divergence from our reality here. There's this billionaire, Landon Kettlewell, and I mean, yeah, just marinate in that name for a second. Landon,
London Kettlewell.
one of those Oxbridge nonsense names are
It's the kind of outlandish prep school name that always seemed a little made up to her. The new
precisely.
CEO in the front for the majority owners of Kodak slash Duracell.
Yes, yes, Kodak and
End
Duracell.
quote.
He has bought two companies that make obsolete technology, right? Film cameras, and they're still around. Batteries are kind of on the decline, right? He's bought those companies, he's fused them together, and he's like, okay, I've got all this capital from these dinosaurs of the corporate scene, and I'm going to invest them into tens of thousands of entrepreneurs. Just give a bunch of motivated nerds the power to make things, and we're going to see what they come up with. They can iterate off of each other, and I'm going to create this ecosystem of innovation where once there was stagnation. And we open on a press conference where he's laying out this whole vision here. We got Suzanne Church is our POV character. Let's introduce her. Suzanne Church almost never had to bother with a blue blazer these days. Back at the height of the dot boom, she'd put on her business journalist drag, blazer, blue sailcloth shirt, khaki trousers, loafers, just about every day, putting in her obligatory appearances at splashy press conferences for high-flying IPOs and mergers. These days, it was mostly work at home or one day a week at the San Jose Mercury News' office, in comfortable light sweaters with loose necks and loose cotton pants that she could wear straight to yoga after shutting her computer's lid. Blue blazer today, and she wasn't the only one. There was Reedy from the New York Times Silicon Valley office, and Tribby from the Wall Street Journal, and that despicable rat-toothed jumped-up gossip columnist from one of the UK tech rags, and many others besides.
God, I
Well,
hope we never hear from that rat-toothed guy again.
Yeah,
I was-
Hopefully
I
he's
hope that guy
just
doesn't come back. Yeah, he's not
yeah, that
important.
would suck.
I was gonna ask, like, do we know who this guy is? Is he supposed to be a reference to somebody IRL?
That's a great question. I don't know anything about like the tech journalism scene of the 2000s. I kind of just kept picturing him as Ricky Gervais, I guess
Yeah.
because he's British.
You know what?
It's probably just like some guy who was like an asshole on the
Yeah,
forums.
yeah.
Like
It
lost
probably
to
that didn't
history.
even occur to me, but it probably is just like a caricature of someone that Doctorow didn't like. Because it is like it's funny, it's so mean-spirited in like every and like they're always like there are opportunities for like Suzanne to like get epic dunks in on this guy. And
Mhm.
like the story kind of like it's like he's ugly and he has a bad personality and he's so mean to our heroes for no reason other than like, well, he doesn't like himself and he doesn't want to, I don't know, he just wants to tear other people down. Which is funny because sometimes when you do get a little bit more detail on Rat Tooth Freddy, I ended up liking him a little bit.
Hmm.
I
He's
mean, when
right sometimes.
he's right
Mhm.
sometimes, yeah. And I always throughout the book, I felt like the narrative was being a little bit unfair to him and was sort of stacking the deck against him.
There are spaces, yeah, where that is the case. Like, Max, are you familiar with the film I Care a Lot?
I am. I haven't seen it. I know that the actress from Gone Girl, I'm struggling to recall her name at the moment. She hits a big vape.
Rosamund
That's
Pike.
Rosamund Pike, yeah.
Yeah. It put me in mind, Freddie did, this rat tooth journalist, right? There's this dude at the beginning. Of course, Rosamund Pike plays a predatory attorney who forces elderly people into like homes and then like strips them of their like assets and whatever. There's a dude at the beginning of the movie who is really, apparently she's picked up his mother in this scheme of hers, and he's taking her to task for it. He's yelling at her about it, and he's really like unpleasant about it. He is like, "Oh, I hope you get raped. I hope you get died. This, that, the other." Like, just very, misogynistic, unpleasant in every possible way. He is somebody who does have a legitimate complaint against this person. And that's the vibe that I'm getting from Freddy, right? He's a repellent individual who, if he could stop like getting epic dunks in his blog, he could actually slow down and have some sort of analysis. But he keeps tripping over his own poison pen.
Definitely
Yeah,
along
and
those
I guess I
lines.
wonder. I think on some level the book does see that potential in Freddy because he kind of has that confrontation with the Disney guy in the medieval times type place. Now I
Hmm.
guess I'm getting ahead of myself.
No
But
sweat, no sweat. We're just
yeah.
bouncing around. This book bounces around. Why can't we,
Yeah,
you know?
it does bounce around, yeah.
But to frame it a little bit, like, yeah, so Kettlewell has set up this thing they're calling Codacell, Kodak and Duracell, and he's using that infrastructure, that money, that capital, and he's just dumping it into a bunch of entrepreneurs because the future is now, and because, yeah, he's like, we're gonna just make a bunch of stuff, we're gonna do a bunch of microloans, we're gonna do a bunch of innovation sparkles, and it's very, turn of the decade, very like, you know. I mean, it puts one in mind of like the way like companies like Amazon and Uber and stuff were able to be successful by just operating at a loss quarter after quarter and undercutting the competition until they were everything. It's very like that era Silicon Valley type of stuff. Not that we're like not in that era anymore, but it's a very like even pre 2008 type mindset. Which like this book has its own type of like 2008 dot-com bubble crash, not too long, like, into the narrative. But yeah, it's like this idea. And then our framing of the character we're with most of the book, or at least like a good third or half the book, is Suzanne. And she's this tech journalist who she allows us to she's able to be this character who goes and asks questions and investigates in ways that maybe wouldn't be natural of other characters. So Doctorow can be like, here, look at all this cool shit like I've like innovated here, and like showing us through, similar to how like we talked about like the Lord of the Rings episode, like you have a hobbit so that you can tell the hobbit what everything around you is. In this, you have the journalist so the author can like take the journalist through the thing. And I like Suzanne well enough. What do we think about Suzanne?
I don't know, yeah. I think that like I like Suzanne well enough as like sort of the entry point character. I think that she
Hmm.
like functions well. I think that the idea of having a journalist in the story, it both like yeah, it gives the reader an entry point and it like moves the plot along at important times. And Dr. O has a good sense of like, oh, how would having a journalist standing here like affect how things are unfolding right now? Because she doesn't just observe the things that go on around her. She sort of like changes the shape of things by writing about them in a way where like she slowly realizes that that's what she's doing. Um, like the she's brought on to write about Codacell and the makers. She's embedded with this team of two guys, Lester and Perry, who are making all these little gizmos and doing
Mhm.
all of these technological experiments. But some of the other stuff, I don't know. I've never felt 100% great about how Dr. O writes women. I don't think it comes from an intentional place, but I think it comes from a place very much of wanting to respect women and understand women. But I think that sometimes his female characters like feel a little bit incomplete to me.
Mm.
Mhm.
Um, and like Suzanne, like there are moments where like she coalesces and makes sense as a person, and there are other moments in the story where it's just like I don't know. Like she feels more like she's there to observe what's going on and less like she's sort of a personality in her own right.
And it
And
does work
then
to an extent because she's a journalist, right?
right,
But I
yeah,
understand what you're saying for sure.
Yeah,
It's super
yeah,
useful at the beginning,
yeah,
though, I
Max,
will say.
you do hit on something about her that was kind of irking me, especially in this first third. Jacob, I know I was blowing up your phone about it earlier in the week. Like, she's a journalist, yes, she's a point of view for us, yes, into this new like tech paradigm, but she's a very credulous journalist. Like,
Mhm.
yes,
it's first of all, I mean,
She's not
initially,
good at her job. I will
no.
say this, which I enjoy. I don't think Doctorow would say she's the best journalist in the world. Like, I don't
yeah,
think but like, I do like that, but also like, it is worth noting, like off the bat, like, this is not the greatest journalist in the world. She is absolutely like, yeah, she's absolutely drank the Kool-Aid here. But I'm sorry, Lenore, go ahead.
Well, yeah, but that's the thing. Like, she has drinking the Kool Aid here, because, like, okay, initially She's there with Freddie, who's kind of a sleaze, who's kind of a like jackass, who's just a professional troll, kind of. He's described several times as a professional troll, in
No,
fact.
he's like literally, I picture the troll face when they like describe this guy.
Exactly. Problem, Kettlewell. But yeah, no, but that's the thing, right? So initially, like you're kind of on her side when this jackass is right next to her, coming on to her, but also like, oh yeah, like this, just there to kind of crash the party. But that's the thing is she's not just in contrast to Freddie's skepticism. She's totally, as you say, on board with it. There's a bit here where Landon is introducing this universal translator, right? That has come about as a result of this, like, of having funded one of these little entrepreneurial boondoggles, right?
One
And
of these, quote, network of like-minded, cooperating, autonomous teams empowered to do what they want, end quote,
yes,
which makes me want to
yes.
like give him a wedgie. But
Well, yeah, because that's the thing. He says, in the process of, and I'll come back around to Suzanne, I promise. Like in the process of buying up Codacell, right, and streamlining it into this new thing, he's had to lay off a whole bunch of workers, and
Mhm.
indeed, a whole bunch of protesters who have been laid off come in, and they're yelling at him, rightfully, and he says, "Look, there's nothing that says these new entrepreneurs can't come from within." But he's also just said that, okay, but your value to the company, your ability to do that depends on what you return to its coffers through this private enterprise you're developing. A. And what's going on here? While this is going on, Suzanne is using one of these universal translators to make Kettlewell heard over the noise of the crowd, right? Because one of the things
Mhm.
it can do is it can take in somebody's voice and then project it in whatever language, right? So it puts the Kettlewells of the world, right, at a remove from what they're saying, right? In the space of seconds, right, this universal translator goes from proof of concept for the business model, right, proof of concept for facilitating communication, to a tool of that business model, right? The
Mhm.
inertia of this like mass liquidation that he's done is filtered through the machinery that it's created rather than relayed directly to us, right? Its primary function, in a sense, or one of its main functions, is now to sell our own obsolescence to us, right? It lets him do an end run around the protest. It lets him speak over the masses without raising his voice. He's not even translating one language to another. He's speaking English. He's just finding a narrow wedge to get his message across. And the person holding the universal translator is Suzanne. So and that's where I was kind of at throughout most of the first third of this book, right? Because journalism in this space is not simply a neutral act. She is making a very conscious decision about whose voice she elevates and how she talks about it on her blog.
I guess like the one additional thing that I had to say about Suzanne and gender that sort of like coalesced in my head is that in this book, which I also remember being the case at the very least with Little Brother and its sequel Homeland,
Mm-hmm.
is that like women are around to document and cheer on and contribute to the things that men do, but they are not depicted as doing things by themselves or being important in their own right. And it also feels to some extent like the female characters, especially Hilda or like the girlfriend that Death Waits gets towards the end of the book, exists sort
Oh
of as
God,
like
yeah.
rewards for the male heroes for doing the right thing.
I was literally about to say, you're telling me Hilda's not a fully realized
Yeah.
character.
That is like I think the most sort of egregious instance
Oh,
of it.
yeah.
Does Hilda not refresh your arrows?
Jesus Christ.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Uh,
We'll get
I,
into
I
that.
got a note too, just as Georgia mentioned, the projector thing was invented by engineers from Athens, Georgia, according to this book. So, just Goat State, Georgia mentioned. Just had to throw that out there. Um,
Yeah, shout out to UGA.
Shout out to UGA. We agree with everything that happens at UGA. That's the stance. That yeah.
But
No.
that's but that's where we find our next two characters that we mentioned, Lester and Perry, right? Two of these
Mhm.
sufficiently motivated nerds that are now receiving this Kettlewell funding, right?
And
Um,
literally, no matter how much time you spend with them, there should be more time with these two guys. I fucking love Lester and Perry. I have to say, just right off the bat, these dudes rule. Such a big fan of Lester and Perry. And they make this book for me.
Yeah, yeah, like you really understand how they could like become faces of like the new work movement and then of the ride movement or whatever they're calling it at that point in the book, like they do actually come across as written as these like very intelligent, charismatic people in their own way, which is something that as like a writer is not easy to do. It's not easy to write smart people. It's not easy to write people who like you believe are like really this like convincing and interesting to others. But I think Doctor pulls it off pretty well.
Hmm.
I think it's just he's spending so much time with people like this, right? That's what he's
Yeah.
engaging with both online and in person. That's like so much time. And it's like Lester and Perry are both these two guys that Suzanne meets working out of an abandoned mall. And they're working on all kinds of stuff, literally turning trash into treasure, taking thousands of like boogie woogie Elmos. And making like machines out of them and all this like elaborate stuff. And they're both like very smart, but not in a they're human though. Like they're very, they've got their insecurities. They communicate in their own ways. They're very like, they have their sort of bro relationship with one another. They live a
Yeah.
very like frat house type life.
Hmm.
Um and it's worth noting like Lester, because this is important to the plot. Lester is a very heavy guy. Lester is very, very overweight, to a fairly unhealthy extent. And that it's not like helped at all by the lifestyle of like living in Florida and the only place they can eat at is IHOP, which makes the point of. But it's these just two guys living this lifestyle that they were already selling stuff to collectors, and now Kettlewell is dumping some amount of capital into them to just be like invent something cool and then get a return for me. And like even hooks him up with a business manager and is like, okay, these are the two smartest guys. Suzanne, you follow them, you blog them. He was like, you have full access. This is actually not corrupt at all because I'm giving you full access to these guys. You can write whatever you want. None of this is me putting the levers, having my fingers on the levers of journalism. But like, of course it is. And of course, she's writing, puff piece after puff piece about these guys.
Yeah, it's real interesting, right? Because her first impression, Suzanne's of, or one of her initial impressions of Lester is let's see, page 16. Perry is like, right, that's next week, and this is all, and this after we've got some work to do, but now I'm ready for lunch. You guys ready for lunch? Something about food and really fat guys. It seemed like an awkward question to Suzanne, like asking someone who'd been horribly disfigured by burns if you wanted to toast a marshmallow. But Lester didn't react to the question. Of course not. He had to eat. Everyone had to eat. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, it's a real interesting thought to cross her mind, right? She's hyper aware of, I think, the wrong thing. Cause to my mind, and people may disagree with me, but like, Perry's just asking, hey, let's get lunch because we got to eat. Um, the fact of her being hyper aware of this while standing in a third location, like off the grid, is odd to me. And I think it really touches on a kind of myopia that not just her, but like all these characters share as they're caught up in this new paradigm they're building.
Yeah.
Suzanne is very neurotic in a lot of ways too, like
Yeah.
intentionally so, and even about her body. Like multiple times through this book, she thinks, "Well, look at my body. I look terrible. I've gained weight. I'm not whatever this, that, and the other." So maybe it has something to do with that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I guess I'm going to tap in again. I'm becoming the resident woke scold here.
No, no, you're
To
good.
sort of quibble about like I guess like how Dr. Ao thinks about Lester's body and about fatness. And there are things
Mhm.
about it that I think are interesting. And I think Dr. Ao is coming from like an ultimately good place in some ways, but there are other things about it that bother me. Um,
Yeah, let's unpack that.
yeah, I'm trying to find like what I had screenshotted. But basically, like Dr. Rao in the like it's very clearly like I've seen Dr. Rao talk about fatness, about the cultural idea of the obesity epidemic in pretty much the exact words that he puts in this book. So it's like very much a vehicle for like him saying something that he literally believes and just putting it in the mouths of his characters, which he does from time to
Sure.
time. Obviously, like it's like not everything the characters do or say in the book is reflective of Dr. Rao's like actual beliefs in real life. This I think is where he basically talks about like how like he believes, fatness to be an essentially natural thing.
Because
Yeah, he says he's talking about how being thin is a maladaptive trait through most of human history. Burning unnecessary calories when you've got to chase down an antelope to get more. That's no way to live long enough to pass on your genes. So you and Perry, with your little skinny selves, able to pack away trans fats and high fructose corn syrup and a pound of candy for breakfast at the IHOP, you're not doing this on willpower. You're doing it by expressing the somatotype of a recessive counter survival gene. So that comes up. And then, unfortunately, I did not screenshot this in my ebook, but he also talks about how what you guys are talking about really like he's living this lifestyle where the nearest restaurant is an IHOP that like serves unhealthy food. I think that's also an element of Dr. Av's argument that like the food in America is a lot of it bad for people, especially cheap food, especially easily accessible and quick to acquire food. And like that's why people are fat. And I have some sympathy with that argument. Like I don't think that he's wrong on the merits, right? Like that people are fat and are accordingly unhealthy sometimes in the way that being really fat makes you because of like social conditions, like poverty, like access to food, and because of genetics, not because of a lack of willpower or a moral
Right.
failing. But even though I think Dr. O sincerely believes that, he does just like clearly have a visceral reflexive disgust for fat people's bodies that he cannot get over and seems to assume that everybody shares, which like is often true. Like we do live in a very fat phobic society, but every time Lester is described, it's like I don't know, like I don't think about people's bodies this way. He also seems to be under the impression that like somebody who is 400 pounds like would have no sex life and no love life, which like I'm sure that like there are people who like feel that way about themselves and who live that way, but I don't think it's like 100% borne out by reality, and I think it's a little weird that he makes that assumption.
Yeah, no, he does return frequently to Lester's, shame and insecurity, right? Even after, Lester does
Fatkins.
the Fatkins thing, yes. And we'll get into what that is, but like basically um somebody synthesizes a whole bunch of treatments to hypercharge metabolism, and that's it. You can't turn it off. Like for the rest of your life, you have to consume 10,000 calories a day or just literally waste away.
It is like a thing where like what you're saying, Max, I agree. When I'm reading this book, I'm wondering, and this would be for Doctor himself, I guess, to answer, but also we're reading it, so we have to interpret it as we do. What is supposed to be, reflective of reality, quote unquote, and what is supposed to be in these characters' heads, right? Like,
Yeah.
is this a Lester thing, or is this in to Doctorow all overweight people thing? Is this Suzanne's particular problems, or is this the way? And the problem is Doctorow so often uses his characters, like you said, as a vehicle for his
Yeah.
own opinions that it's hard to be like, well, which one are you doing here? Because you just gave a spiel about things that like you said, we broadly agree with, that like a lot of this is a social thing and an economic thing, and that people don't have access to certain things that can make them healthier. But you just did that from that character. So then when that character goes and says, because I'm fat, I don't have a sex life and I don't think of myself as a sexual being, is this now back in Lester mode, or are we still Dr. F speaking? And I
Yeah.
don't know. And that is the danger of having characters express your opinions for you. And I don't know what his opinions are, and I'm not like, coming for him, but I was gonna say that too, that it's like that is the danger of when you just have characters sit down and give you a monologue about what the author actually thinks, is then when that character says something else, it's like, well, are you saying that? And I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. It's a question that I definitely ask a lot in the book.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny because like I think that like for somebody who is a socialist and who is pretty much anti-capitalist, like Dr. Rao is still really like intoxicated by the dream of capitalism and
Yes,
excited by the
100%.
idea of business competition. And sometimes when characters talk about these things, it's like I don't understand to what extent you're for this or against this or like where you come down on it ultimately.
Mhm. Well,
Yeah,
the sorry, go ahead, Lenore.
it's a really interesting thing because I feel like Dr. Rao has this. Did I just give him a different pronunciation? I don't know. We're gonna do
You're
that.
fine.
Yeah, I feel
I
like I keep shifting in like what I'm saying.
Cory.
Corey,
Yeah,
my
Mr.
boy
Cory,
Corey.
because
Yeah,
that's the thing. Like
homie.
he lays out a lot of what I took for foreshadowing in this first part. that either I was jumping at shadows here or isn't really followed up on. And that's what makes me think there's a little bit less of that's what made me think initially there's a little bit less of a remove between Cory himself and his characters, right? Because what I'm seeing here in Lester is like what interests me more about him is like the way he hyperfixates on stuff, right? We talked just a minute ago about like myopia of these characters, right? Like he uses one of his like little hobbies in this inventing space that they have is building like little adding machines out of junk, right? And he uses brown M&Ms in these, right? And it's a reference, he says, to Van Halen, the band, right? Because he wants to get to the point where, oh, I can be a prick and like demand like there's no brown M&Ms in my dressing room. And I'm looking at that and I'm like, now wait a minute here. The reason that Van Halen, are y'all familiar with the story?
I am familiar with the story, and I know what you're about to say about it.
Yeah,
I
Jacob.
only know this because you told me the other day.
Oh, that's true. Yes.
But you should share it anyway.
For our listeners, yeah, we're not going to make a Google stuff. This is not a podcast where you should have Google open. This should be your only source of information, actually.
That's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah,
That's true.
no. So Van Halen had this thing where in their contracts with the venues that they would perform at, they would stipulate, okay, no brown M&Ms in our dressing room. There's going to be a bowl of M&Ms in the dressing room, no brown ones, right? The reason for this was not to be rich pricks. They used pyrotechnics in their performances that had to be set up in a very specific way to avoid injury. And so if they walked into their dressing room and saw brown M&Ms, they would know the contract was not read through entirely, right? And that's a really fun sign for me because I'm looking at it in the context of the geography of Lester and Perry's workshop, right? It's in a mall that was never opened, never added to GPS. So it's snatched out of the past, out of time, out of its original function, off the map. So right away, you get a crab cannery ship sort of vibe where the entrepreneur has built this environment that it alone can locate and control, right? So to my mind, this is a situation where it's like, okay, here's a guy who's willing to use a special set of skills and not ask questions, right? Whether it's, Lester, sufficiently
Yeah.
motivated and knowledgeable nerd, or the scientist in Jurassic Park, or the kid in Blood Meridian, right? And so I'm looking at this and I'm like, okay, it's gonna blow up here. How?
Mhm. And they are doing some like genuinely cool shit. Like they have what's called a tape loading seashell robot toaster made out of discarded obsolete technology. And they say cool stuff like the world is full of capacious, capable, disposable junk that cries out to be used again. Shades of the Book of Form and Emptiness there to, just make this episode where we reference every former episode. There's like a bizarre image I wrote down where it says they came to a dusty, stripped down smart car, one of those tiny two-seat electric cars you could literally buy out of a vending machine in Europe. It was barely recognizable, having been reduced to a roll cage, drivetrain, and control panel. A gang of naked robot Elmos were piled into it. Like you are existing in this like weird in-between space. This space that's like between the cracks of like this current market and the next one as this bubble inflates and explodes. And characters are throwing around a lot of ideas and they're building a lot of stuff. And eventually they're gonna be like, let's build this market for the homeless, and these like this easy 3D printing for the homeless, and I'm sure this will all go great. And it's just this continuing building thing that you just all this weirdness is floating around. And like Lenore says, it is inevitable that the shoe is going to drop. And I do think that, this is the kind of thing that works as they're like sharing these ideas and they're throwing around ideas of like capitalist post scarcity that like supposedly possible. And you're seeing this growing homeless population, even with like a shanty town. And they're like trying to be good guys by moving the people from the shanty town into their workspace, but then the people are doing the work for them and it becomes like a company town.
The
And
new
there's
work.
new work. And it's
New
just
work.
so many weird little things floating around. It's a lot of fun, but it's
There's a
also
bit
like,
that there's a bit that we skipped early on where like Landon Kettlewell, right, is laying out his philosophy here, and he brings up the falling rate of profit obliquely, and he says, "We will brute force the problem space of capitalism in the 21st century." Like,
I'm always doing that. Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah, I'm always doing that.
Mark Fisher couldn't have put it better, right? Because it's such a plainly absurd statement that you're like, okay, but what's the other shoe going to look like?
That's me paying
Yeah.
my rent. I'm brute forcing capitalist. Me trying to explain to my landlord. Speaking of the in this homeless population is very important actually. There's this shanty town that's right near the mall. Um and it's led by this guy Francis, who it describes as the leader of the paramilitary wing of the AARP, which is a pretty good bit. And it's this like out of work engineer who's like down on his luck, after like retiring and then all of a sudden having medical bills eat up his savings. Um, and it is like the description of these people who are homeless is quite strange. Uh, he uses the word homeboy to describe them a lot. Um,
Yeah, this is when you remember that this is what made me remember anyway that Cory Doctorow when he founded Boing Boing, his co-founder was how do you say her name is Zenny Jardine. You guys kind of like remember the kind of stuff that she was always saying on Twitter?
I
no,
wasn't
I
onto her
don't.
this time.
Okay, let me just pull up Zenny Jardine. And I don't want to I think that like sometimes Doctor O is like straining a little bit too much to be like hip and in touch. Uh God, I don't know. His very white co-writer like referred to like gangsta checking someone. Um and
That's
like sometimes
sick.
besides Doctor O has some of those tendencies as well.
Yeah, like I remember, yeah, the
How do you do, fellow kids?
yeah, no, it's a
Yeah.
little like referring, and it's like it's
And
what
he
it
uses
is, you know.
some internet slang in this book that's very dated now as well.
Oh yeah.
Poning
And
gets used a couple times. You pwned
yeah.
someone. And I love that in this world in the 2020s, they were regularly poning people. That's so
Yeah,
cool.
suck balls to awesome.
God, I
Honestly,
I got
better
hives at
better
that line.
timeline. Better timeline. No, actually, I'm fully behind Corey on this one. We should be poning
Wow,
people.
this is
We should,
controversial.
yeah. But yeah, and it's interesting because while this is happening, I want to make clear, like Corey has a lot of like sympathy and concern for these people, this
Mhm.
this homeless population. And there's like a fire that literally burns down the shanty town that they're living in, and like nobody does anything. The fire department doesn't intervene. And it's these like good intentions that lead to these homeless people moving into the mall and then becoming a test market. And they're like, oh, the homeless are actually a untapped market, and it says he's talking about like, you know, Lester saying, Perry, this is the business. We're turning this into a worker-owned co-op. The point of this exercise is to try all different businesses as possible and see what works. You know, um, it's solving the problem for all these people too. They're doing like a liberal company town here.
Yeah,
Which and it's this like it's this thing where they're like, we're going to make this market and it's all going to be great and it's awesome. And you have, uh, actually, let me read this exact quote actually.
Please.
They're talking and they said, so they're talking, there's more than 1 billion squatters worldwide, right? And then there's something there. These people have money, like I said. They buy and sell in the stream of commerce. They often have to buy at a premium because the services and goods available to them are limited. Think of how a homeless person can't take advantage of bulk packaged perishables because she doesn't have a fridge. They are the spirit of ingenuity, too. They mod their cars, caves, anything they find to be living quarters. They turn RVs into permanent homes. They know about the tents, sleeping bags, and cardboard more than any UN shelter specialist. These people need housing, goods, appliances, you name it. It's what John used to call a greenfield market. No one else knows it's there. You want something you can spend ungodly amounts of money on? This is it. Get every team in the company to come up with products for these people. Soak up every cent they spend. Better us providing them with quality goods at reasonable prices than letting them get ripped off by profiteers who have a captive market. The plant referring to the place where the homeless people are living in a company town, is a living lab. This is the kind of market intelligence you can't buy right here. We should set up more of these. Invite squatters all over the country to move onto our grounds, test our products, help our designs, build and market them. This goes on for a while. And I just wrote, this is fucking diabolical. Um,
Oh,
yeah.
um,
Like you see
yeah.
how they get there, sort of, but it is insane to watch the protagonists of the novel pitch like, but what if we had a good sweatshop?
Yes.
Mhm.
And it's you do see how they get there because they get there literally by saying, "Well, you need somewhere to sleep tonight. Come and stay in our workshop." And
Yeah.
they literally don't intend it to go where it does. And I do think that Doctorow is quite good at showing how these unintended consequences of these little decisions and then these little, well, this would be easier or this would be ingenious or whatever. And every time they move towards profit, they're moving in a direction that's going to take things not necessarily in the best direction and potentially towards a global financial crash.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, it's it's someplace where the book felt almost a little bit too intimate at times for me because we get the perspective of your Lesters, your Perrys, your Francises, the older gentleman who's the king of the homeless men or whatever. Like we get their perspective of the people in charge of building this shanty town that, according to the pros, does meet and exceed county code. Okay, cool. This is America. There are hundreds in this new work paradigm that springs up that don't. I guarantee you. Like Suzanne herself
Yeah.
says late in the book that lots of people got blisteringly rich off of new work. Do the math.
Mhm.
Yeah. I was thinking about another thing too. They talk in the beginning about how they can tell the computer chips on the Boogie Woogie Elmos that they're using, like to
Yeah.
build the car driving, are quote unquote karmically clean because they can tell from the way the solder looks that it wasn't done by human hands, that it wasn't like exploited sweatshop labor. And it's like, but that can't be true of every single device that you're using and taking apart, right? And it can't
Mm.
be true of everything that's being produced under the new work paradigm. But like the
Yeah.
book never really, it's always kind of like referenced a little bit. Like they'll kind of throw in acknowledgments like, yes, and we know like these technological booms are fueled by like exploited labor, by disenfranchised people and by people in the global south. But the book like never totally engages with that, I think, because like maybe it is a little bit too big and a little bit too scary to really talk about like the kind of human suffering that like capitalism can create when it's on that scale.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, no, like
Absolutely.
like you nailed it. Like, and especially not only the demand of producing the raw materials, but like I couldn't help but thinking how much more food needs to be grown for the Fatkins trend to even be a thing.
Yeah, if you like think about the environmental impact of anything that happens in this story, the people eating like 10,000 calories a day, like you said, or just like all of the like cheap junk that is constantly being described throughout the book, the like contact lenses and t-shirts and 3D printed this and that, and like there's so much like plastic that it's
Mhm.
crazy. And like they never like it's like, oh, like we find all this cool stuff in the junkyard that we can reuse. And it's like some stuff you can't reuse though. Some stuff is like disposable and then you throw it away.
Hmm.
Absolutely. And a
And
lot
that's
of it
another thing they never
explicitly
engage with.
so because that
Yeah.
makes the money.
Yeah.
Um, Speaking of things like going poorly, Perry gets shot in the face.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did not remember this from like when I read the book in high school, and I was surprised to see it there.
Yeah, and it's not important too much to the plot, but there is this moment where the police show up, and this rare moment where the state is present at all, because like government has very much in this world retreated in a lot of ways. Like they're suing each other, but it's still like who's got the most money, got the most lawyers. But in this brief moment, just to crack down on the homeless encampment, on the shanty town, whatever they're calling it at the time, the co-op in quotations, the police show up and Lester gets shot in the face with a less than lethal ammunition, and it doesn't kill him, but it gives him a bit of a face deformity where he's got a quote funny eyebrow and he doesn't see as well out of that eye. And I do think that like from here on out, he is like Perry is a little bit more of like a brutish guy. He's a little bit more like he's never quite sparkles the way he does in that like opening scene. And some of that is this like direct impact from the market, but I think some of that is from this and like the chip he gets on his shoulder. And even after
Yeah.
he like wakes up in the hospital, he's like ranting, being like, make printers and sell them, make machines that make the goop we feed into the printers. Teach a man to fish, teach a man to fucking fish. He he
Yeah.
he really like starts to go mad scientist
He becomes a little bit
after
more
this.
of he becomes the cult leader that Rat Tooth Freddy has kind of been slandering him as.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. He gives into it. And I think that's interesting. And it's also a thing that
Yeah.
I was wondering when I first was like, well, what's the police situation with this like shanty town or whatever? Um, and But the thing is, his whole teach a man to fish, let's print off a million things. Let's make 3D printing, cheaper than water bottles. Let's make it cheaper to, print your own home than to buy a home. Let's whatever. Is it like when you have this like time jump that happens not too long after this, you
Yeah.
literally cut to a guy like at a stoplight and there's this 100 people around him trying to shove plastic into his car. And it's like this, and that's like part of where I got the like, this isn't literally true, but some of the vibes are on with the
Yeah.
just like there's just so much shit flooding from all directions.
Yeah. The world is becoming increasingly overstimulating. Not as much as the world described in this book, but it's more like he's not 100% wrong, like from 2009 to now, we've gotten closer in some ways to the future that Doctorow was imagining.
The internet is more like this than he expected,
Yes.
and the real world is less like it, I guess.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah,
less is happening in the real world than maybe he expected.
Yeah.
yeah. No, he very ably depicts. He very ably calls the fact that yeah, they're what capitalism looks like, what the gig economy that's being born at this time is coming out of the ashes of something very real, right? Because or rather about coming out of the very real demise of the dot-com bubble and like all the trends that came before it, right? I mean, because we have the issue that Suzanne faces is okay, well, I have a lucrative newspaper job, right? Can I leave this to come to this thing that I'm a true believer in, right?
Hmm.
And the issue is forced because the people she's letting her house to are no longer living in her house. Like a guy moves to San Jose for marketing, brings his girlfriend, abandons her, kills himself because he had to grind to survive in Silicon Valley, and it's a grueling and maddening way to live. Where does he kill himself? The parking lot of a ghost mall, sort of like the one that they're starting this new like inventing space in.
Yeah.
So yeah, the old, there's not a whole lot of time to dwell on the implications of what's going on here. The inertia that just kind of shifts forward, and you have to make a split decision. He also hits on something very very true here, which is that her job is in danger at the San Jose Mercury because budgets are being cut for newsrooms at this time. There's fewer people. Alan McLeod writes about this in Bad News from Venezuela. There's fewer people that they can afford to be full-time correspondents. They're getting more and more of their stuff from news wires, and like a job like hers can potentially pay for like a few other people in that space. So she has to make a decision: do I jump ship or don't I?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess like sort of the quote unquote blogosphere was already sort of a thing in 2000. Do people say blogosphere anymore? I don't know. Whatever.
It's what it was called then.
We
Yeah,
sure
that's
do
what,
now.
he would have called it probably.
Yeah.
And like it's like yeah, like that's only gone like further and further as like people just start like Substacks now.
Yeah.
And they just like have an email newsletter or whatever because like it is like it's become more stable to do that than it has to like than like working in the legitimate media industry for like
Yeah.
the vast majority of journalists.
I mean, like, friend of the pod, been on to talk, Vincent Bevins was talking about like he had a stable job, working for news. And like then it became important in like the early 2010s that he was really big on Twitter for like his career,
Yeah.
as a journalist, no matter how well he wrote, no matter whatever. Turns out he's quite good at Twitter and he's quite good at writing, and everyone should read his books. Like I said, his best book of last couple of years is
Mhm.
If We Burn. But that said, it's interesting. Like, yeah, and he's writing this time where the blogosphere has already declined, and will decline significantly more. Doctorow today is like one of the only people blogging properly.
Yeah.
It's a shame. I do think it is a shame because I do love that style of internet,
Yeah, I
but
miss blogs. We don't have
no
blogs
doubt.
anymore. I had blogs for like I could there was like such a short window of time where I could like read and enjoy blogs. I'm like 23 and it feels
Yeah,
like I woke up one day and it's like no, there's no more blogs. It's all tweets now. It's all
Literally.
yes.
videos.
It was all
Videos are even
tweets.
worse.
And then
literally
you can
like
get banned by a crazy billionaire from Twitter for no particular
Yeah, and
reason.
like that's it.
And then
Like
that's it.
social media has become so centralized.
my my
RIP
my
the socialist shelf account.
yeah,
Salute.
yeah, that's gonna fucking needle us forever. That's so infuriating. Like, but no, you're absolutely right. Like my it's a Wild West kind of, that's a bad metaphor, but like it's a freewheeling space that doesn't really exist anymore, right? And that but that nevertheless inspired so many other people. Like I probably wouldn't be in, the sort of writing and creative spaces I've been in were it not for my cousin's old blog back in the day. Y'all should Google zombie fight shark. It's really fucking funny. Like these places were, it's from the era where you went to more than like five websites, you know?
Right.
Yeah, yeah. I
I
mean, I'm a
and
webcomic artist, so
yeah, exactly.
And yours
Um,
should be one of the five websites that people go to.
there
yeah,
you go.
absolutely.
Yeah, your website, the Socialist Shelf link tree, and the other three, take your pick. But
Yeah,
um,
whatever.
it's actually like, and then that ties directly into the sort of term Doctorow coined in shitification.
Yeah,
Uh, and he's actually got a quote. I'll read it. I'll read it right now that he said about enshittification. This is from his blog, where he said, and right off the bat when he uses the term 90s kids, and he wrote this in 2020, is pretty funny. But uh, 90s kids had a good reason to be excited about the internet's promise of disintermediation. The gatekeepers who controlled our access to culture, politics, and opportunity were crooked as hell. And besides, they sucked. And for a second there, we really did get a lot of disintermediation, which created a big, weird, diverse, pluralistic space of all kinds of voices, ideas, identities, hobbies, businesses, and movements. Lots of these were either deeply objectionable or really stupid or both, but there was also so much cool stuff on the old, good internet. Then, after about 10 seconds of sheer joy, we got all new gatekeepers who were at least as bad and even more powerful than the old ones. The net became five giant websites, each filled with screenshots of the other four. Culture, politics, finance, news, and especially power have been gathered into the hands of uncountable, greedy, and often cruel intermediaries. And this is, Doctorow's analysis of the internet just a couple years ago.
yeah,
Only 90s kids will remember, of course.
Yeah.
But it is true. It's actually like so the internet as it exists in this book, if even in the parts of this book that are supposed to take place in the future, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years in the future,
yeah.
does not and never did come into existence. Not properly.
No.
Mhm.
But I guess let's go ahead and hop into the future. What happens after New Work collapses? And the book shifts forward. I'm going to read a little quote here from the perspective of a guy named Sammy. Off the turnpike, it was even worse. The shanty towns multiplied and multiplied. Laundry lines stretched out in parking lots of former strip malls. Every traffic light clogged with aggressive techno tchotchke vendors, the squeegee bums of the 21st century with their pornographic animatronic dollies and infinitely varied robot dogs. And it goes on. It goes on for quite a while, like just the descriptions of these just various things he comes across trying to experience different stuff. He goes to a broken down Walmart, and it's like the area around the dead Walmart was awful. The shanties rose 3, even 4 stories into the air, clustered together to make medieval street mazes. Broward County had long since stopped enforcing the property claims of the bankruptcy courts that managed the real estate interests of the former owners of the fields and the malls that had been turned into new towns. He'd accumulated a comet tale of urchins who wanted to sell him computer-generated bust of himself in the style of a Roman emperor. They worked on affiliate commission for some 3D printer jerk in the shanties, and they had a real aggressive pitch, practically flinging their samples at him. And it goes on, but like they create this physical plastic economy of like
Yeah,
basically like AI art, but like IRL. Like you can like, hey, it's you as a Roman emperor, and it's like this falling apart bust, and here's all this plastic, and here's all this just like bullshit everywhere. Um, and it's everywhere you go. And like Lester and Perry basically through their like ingenuity, like created this. Like they were like, let's give the people power over their own lives, but then they just sort of created this new, weird, even dirtier world.
This is where the shoe does kind of drop, and it's like, okay, well, in order to, because there is certainly that like moment of unbridled joy toward the end that y'all refer to, right, of part one, where there's something genuinely new. It's revitalizing blighted places, giving people, people are getting work, like there's a here, you think. But Codicel isn't delivering on the shareholders' investment because that's what it's about at the end of the day. That's the barrier these sorts of enterprises run up against under capitalism. And suddenly, like, it's not enough that you're creative selling a good product. It's not enough that you're making money. You have to make a sustained rate of profit. And now you got to figure out, okay, in order to succeed in this space, you're not just an artist, you're a market researcher, right? You're a businessman, and that's what it's the tyranny of the production of these production relations. You have to become one at the end of the day to succeed in the other.
And guess who's still
Yeah.
a fucking billionaire? Landon Kettlewell.
Yeah. It's like this is kind of like one of the things that is like so interesting to me about the book because like Doctorow is like so invested in like his dream of, the free and open internet. And the funny thing is like even as he's, kind of like selling you on this dream in the context of this book, he already knows somehow that it's gonna die, and he already kind of knows how.
Mhm.
I don't know. And there's like a quote here from Landon Kettlewell, the billionaire. Some kind of great sorrow that he'd forgotten he'd carried lifted from him, and his chest and shoulders expanded, and he breathed easy. What was the sorrow? The death of the new work, the death of all of the .coms, the death of everything he considered important and worthy. It's fading into tawdry, cheap nostalgia. And like
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of the tragedy at the heart of this book.
Mm.
Yeah, the nostalgia is shot through. Is shot through with it. It's a basically like recession proof market. People just keep coming back to like stuff that they recall from better times.
Well, tell me this, Lenore. Well, what should we do with that nostalgia? Like people might be like thinking of better times. They might be thinking, I want to experience it. I want to relive it. And if only there was like a place you could go, like a ride that you could
Yeah,
experience that. I
yeah.
don't know.
You sit in a chair and you
Is
just
that
kind of
crazy?
you just kind of receive a story. I don't know,
That's
like
is that crazy? There could be some goths there that got fired from Disney World.
I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah, maybe
yeah.
maybe some Brazilians get on the action.
Yeah, there's just some guy that's really mad at it and he just goes around and starts cutting wires. It could
There
be
is
cool.
there
You
there
could
there
you could get a hot alt GF who has
there.
sex with you in a motel room for some reason.
Oh yeah. A lot of planting of openings. Yeah. Um. I'm so excited to fucking discuss that. But no,
That makes one of us.
so much of this presages trends in entertainment that ultimately flop. Like Max, the theme park nerd of the trio here. Did you catch the obviously it's not a reference because this hadn't happened yet because it's 2009, but like Sammy's said to have spearheaded a LARPing initiative at Disney that ultimately went nowhere. Like, were you thinking about the Star
Yes,
Wars
like
Hotel?
Evermore and the
Yeah.
Star Wars
Yes,
Hotel.
yes, Evermore. Yeah.
I
Shout out to
watch a
Jenny
lot of Jenny
Nicholson.
Nicholson.
Yes.
Hmm.
Mm. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, it's these boondoggles that rise and they fall, and that like Disney's kind of a late adopter of. Like, there's a bit where it's mentioned that Fantasyland's been given this like goth makeover
Yes.
because what's it's this weird intersection of counterculture or like alt culture people that still remember this thing from their childhood that maybe they laughed at and kind of derided, but now are finding joy in again.
Yeah, I mean, if you go into a hot topic like right now, it's like, I don't know, like 60% Disney merchandise
Hmm.
by volume in there. So I think that like he was a little I think maybe that was happening to some extent in like the 2000s with like Nightmare Before Christmas and all of that when Disney realized like, oh, this movie that kind of underperformed has built up this big cult following and we can re-release it over and over again in theaters and people will turn out to see it and like we can market our stuff a little bit ironically to people who engage with it as, sort of like a cult, people who engage with Disney stuff as a cult object. And now it's just like you can't like go anywhere during the Halloween season, but particularly not a hot topic without, seeing a bunch of shit with Jack Skellington's head all over it.
I
And
mentioned this plot point to my goth friend, and she was like, "Give us the villain's park."
Yeah,
Yeah,
like it would work, like
it would work.
and what is there but like, what do you see? You see like as soon as people have the opportunity to, they make things like Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. They make Mickey Mouse horror game. They make that like that kind of
Yeah,
thing like does have this appeal like this, and I think it's often like a fairly lazy appeal, right? Like I think it's there's very not always, but a lot of times like I'll see like the Mickey Mouse shirt where it's like Mickey with the middle finger up, and I'm like, oh wow, really creative guys. But like that is a thing that people like, that irony, whatever, and it can be very simple or very complicated. But then there is genuine innovation happening at
Mhm.
this little place, this little Walmart that Lester and Perry are still chipping away at, the Cabinet of Wonders, and you've got this voiceover that describes it, and I'll read you the voiceover. I'll do my best. I'll do my best announcer voice. There was a time when America held out the promise of a new way of living and working. The new work boom of the teens was a period of unparalleled invention, a Cambrian explosion of creativity not seen since the time of Edison. And unlike Edison, the people who invented the new work revolution weren't rip-off artists and frauds. Their marvelous inventions emerged at the rate of 5 or 6 per week. Some danced, some sang, some wore helpmeets, and some were mere jesters. Today, nearly all of these wonderful things have vanished with the collapse of new work. They've ended up back in the trash heaps that inspired them. Here in the Cabinet of Wonders, we are preserving these last remnants of the Golden Age, a single beacon of light in a time of darkness. And this goes on, but I find it interesting that this is, the more agile, creative thing. And it is creative and it is agile, but it is still just nostalgia. Like it is still
yeah,
just
yeah.
nostalgia
Even
for a different thing.
yeah. Their like sort of independent version of what Disney does is yeah, it is just doing its own version of what Disney does in its own way,
It's
where
just
it's
like,
like,
remember
oh,
when you
wasn't
had a
the past
job?
so great? Yeah, remember when you had a job?
That
Yeah.
is that is so sick, man. Like it like doing a just being like, yeah, I want to make a theme park. It's just like you get to live before the housing crisis of
Oh
2008 and just
God.
be
That
like,
sounds awesome.
yeah, buy a house at whatever percent. Yeah, that's basically what they're doing though. But it grows and becomes more complicated and interesting in a very open internet-y type of way.
It
And I'm
becomes
gonna
like open source and like people can like submit their own shit that gets incorporated into the ride.
I'm gonna shoot straight
Yeah.
with y'all. I don't understand how this ride works. Like I
No, no, I don't understand what it is and how it works, or like why it would be popular initially, or like what the appeal of it is exactly. When the ride, basically people can submit user-generated content to the ride, and then there's basically like a Reddit upvote system that allows people
Yeah.
to plus one stuff about the ride that they like, and minus stuff about the ride they don't like, so that like stuff that a lot of people do like when they ride the ride gets pushed to the forefront, and stuff they don't like sort of gradually recedes. And it starts out as the one ride, and then Lester and Perry, who are sort of like, caught up in their nostalgia for the new work boom, kind of floundering, not sure what to do with themselves. They decide, I think Lester pitches, and then Perry agrees with that they're going to basically allow people to open up their own rides elsewhere. Um, and like all of the rides will sort of like update together. They'll all be the same ride, all sort of like ordered by the users of the ride, the people who ride it and engage with it. And like this sort of like gradual story starts to emerge inside the ride. It stops being a nostalgia piece about new work, and it starts becoming this like user generated piece of art.
Yeah, yeah. Upvote the story to karma heaven.
And
I
that's
like
the
I
thing.
don't know.
That's the thing. Like you get caught up in this though. Like it becomes its own sort of like. I mean, there's a bit toward the end of part two where Perry goes on the ride, and he gets so caught up in the nostalgia of seeing these toys and whatnot that people remember
Yeah,
that he forgets he's upvoting. He becomes unconscious of his hand moving the joystick. He's gooning.
he's gooning.
Yeah.
Out here gooning. You got Perry, you got Lester, they're out here, and it's it's interesting. I still don't, like I said, I don't quite understand exactly how it's working and exactly how people are introducing new stuff. The mechanics of it aren't overly important, though I feel like Doctorow does understand it. I don't quite.
Yeah,
Um, but it's like it is interesting this idea of like, and there's the 3D printers making the stuff, and like it has a part where they're Like I do like they come in one day and it's completely destroyed, and then it turns out, oh, they made 50 rides somewhere else and it didn't work, so it broke down. Like there's some fun stuff happening here, and there's some fun stuff too about how an idea can catch on, an idea can
Yeah.
like spread like wildfire, and then all of a sudden you're responsible for something. And you do feel for Perry and Lester, who are just like trying to make cool stuff, and they keep becoming the face of things, which is
Yeah.
not really a thing they asked for. Which is also an interesting way, like how like capitalism slash a information economy, attention economy makes like celebrities out of people that are trying to be genuinely
Yeah.
innovative. Like you can see a world in which like, Perry and Lester just get to innovate and like they don't have to be the face of shit. And like maybe they get interviewed in the sense of like, look at these cool workers innovating, but then they have to be tied up in this competition. They have to be tied up in the getting the $5 at the Walmart and
When you do
renting
cool
it out.
stuff, you
And
end up making money.
that's
Yeah.
the thing. And the money taints it, but also the other type of capital, which is the social capital created on the internet. This like cult following that's like not necessarily wrong or bad. Like it's not bad that they have fans, and the fans aren't wrong for being inspired, but it is like inherently like quite dangerous. And it is like seen as almost this like evolution of the thing Suzanne was previously doing. Suzanne, who, by the way, goes to Russia for a story and then just doesn't come back for a decade. Little confusing. Not sure what happened there.
Yeah, she does just leave the plot for a while because I think Doctorow doesn't really know what to do with her.
Yeah, he also has like a weird chip on his shoulder for Russia. Like it feels like
Yeah.
every time he mentions, not that like, not that we're like, oh, the biggest Russia heads ever, but it does seem every time he mentions Russia, he used to be like, yeah, fucking Russia. And I'm like, well, you didn't have to bring it up.
Yeah, no, I was thinking about that too. I think I have a screenshot from early in the book when they're talking about Russia. Let me just pull that up real quick.
Not that Russia's
Uh,
some kind of paradise, but it did seem like there was like a weird like for a
he's got a chip
country
on
that
his
has
shoulders.
yeah, for a country that has very little to do with the plot, he mentions it negatively a bunch of times.
Yeah, Tian grinned wickedly. Oh yes, he said, I'm going to do business in Russia. Kettlewell grunted and pounded his orange juice. Around them, the jet's windows flashed white as they broke through the clouds and the 10,000-foot bell sounded. How the hell are you going to make anything that doesn't collapse under its own weight in Russia? And like it goes on like this. The corruption's a problem, sure, but it's offset by the entrepreneurship. Some of those cats make the Chinese look lazy and unimaginative. It's a shame that so much of their efforts have been focused on graft, have been centered on graft, but there's no reason they couldn't be focused on making an honest ruble. Like, okay,
And it's yeah, it just kind of happened. Like it just is a thing that recurs a few times.
yeah,
And it's kind of like, yeah, I mean, there is a lot, there is a big, especially in 2009, like there is a big criminal economy in Russia. It just did feel
yeah,
like
I'm
a
sure
weird
there
thing.
is.
It felt like a weird thing to return to over and over. I don't
Yeah, it
know if
doesn't
he
have
has a
anything to do with
personal.
anything, but he's just like, yeah, it seems like he has some personal like thing about Russia. Yeah,
I guess he has family that like fled Russia at the
that's
approach of the
true.
Nazis, but that was the Nazis, not whatever.
Yeah, it's kind
That's
of a
not
different era of Russia. Anyway,
anyway. Yeah, not neither here nor there. Just like
Well,
a thing.
it's also I will say it's from the perspective of people who look at the homeless like in the encampment near where they're building this factory, right? And they move them into this factory town. It's from the perspective of people who look at these guys and their first thought is roommate wear for homeless people, right? They're an
yeah.
untapped market, So somebody could, somebody in that VC space like could definitely look at Russia with its, the socialist state that once existed there is now gone, everything's being sold off, like I mean it's the sort of dynamic that have y'all ever seen the short film The Fall of Communism as seen in gay pornography?
I,
I have not. That sounds very
I've
interesting.
you've told me
It's
about it, but I have
yeah,
not
you
seen
can
it.
it's easy to find. Like it's about the like violent resurgence of the sex trade in like Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. I think specifically in East Germany. And how people got swept up in it and were forced to commodify their sexuality because suddenly the social safety net that once existed now didn't, right?
Sure. That makes me
And
think. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
well, yeah, but that's the thing, it's the sort of I don't think Doctorow's got a bone to pick with Russia so much as he's like winking at the fact that yeah, there are people who will absolutely sweep into this environment and take advantage of the fact that that yeah, it's kind of lawless and we can do stuff here that we can't get away with back home.
Interesting. Interesting.
That's a way of,
Yeah, that's an
I can
interesting
see that reading.
insight.
Mm.
I do think it does make me think of oh, what's his fucking name? DeVos, Richard DeVos. We did the episode on him with
Yeah.
Josh Borman. Um, and how like his company that was literally a multi-level marketing scheme was like waiting for the Berlin Wall to go down just so they could run across and sell like cheap products. And like that was how his company was able to like get how he was able to like get a second boom on his like company that just sells cheap bullshit. And I
Mm.
will say, like, DeVos does seem like a character that it could thrive in this book.
Yeah.
Um, you
I'm
know,
going to Russia.
yes. But and speaking of Russia, yeah, and we read there was like a technology that's kind of popularized there that then spreads around. It's something between a diet and bioengineering. It makes you burn 10,000 calories a day. It's the quote unquote cure for obesity. It is what is called Fatkins, and it will turn you from whatever body type you have to, if you eat 10,000 calories or so a day, you will be just a perfect, almost uncanny valley level. Perfect being to the level that like you can see someone and be like their body is so perfect I know they're Fatkins, which is interesting. Like it's almost like a little unnatural. There's almost like an air of like people who judge the like Fatkins people. And Lester goes through this process. So for the rest of the book until the very end, everyone has to now imagine Lester as like, I don't know, just like a shredded like golden god or whatever. Um,
Yeah.
despite some of those insecurities persisting. And it's a thing that shocker backfires.
Oh God.
And I was like, I was kind of waiting for that to happen the whole time. I was like, something's gonna go wrong here. But
Yeah.
and that's a thing that hangs over the rest of it. And Lester spends the rest of the book being jacked and hot, but also,
Oh, he
carrying
gets
around
jacked,
some
all right.
yes, and carrying around some insecurity, especially when like Suzanne starts showing romantic and like sexual interest
He
for him.
also gets really horny.
Very, very horny. Yes. He didn't get horny when he was obese, which I thought was strange, but
Right. Yeah, it is just like strange to me the presentation of like now we can finally be a sexual being. And it's like, I don't know, like
Mm.
fat people still do like live in the world and have sex.
Mhm.
Like
Or like
maybe that yeah.
you could have even had him like want to have sex and have
Yeah.
trouble in his dating life and then stop having trouble and feel that insecurity. But it instead has him like, oh, I didn't even think about sex before I had a six pack. And that is strange to me.
Yeah, yeah. That sticks out to me. I also like wonder, I guess, like it's clear that Doctorow is like, the whole Fatkins concept and the idea of like a medical cure for weight loss. He understands this is something that will all come to ruin. And he also like there's a conversation later with Hilda where they talk about like there are worse things than being fat. And that is, I think, how Doctorow, feels. Like he thinks that, but it's also just like what, like, it's kind of like what does he want? Like he doesn't think that fat people are suffering from a lack of willpower, and he also doesn't think that like a medical cure for being fat is like a good idea in the long run, but he also definitely thinks being fat is kind of gross. And it's like, well, like what do you want? And like what is your outlook on like people's bodies and like how they should relate to them and how other people should relate to them? Like what is your idea about this? I don't know, maybe he doesn't know.
I would simply, if I were, would simply do Fatkins, but make it work.
Yeah,
It'd just
yeah,
simply
we
be
would just do
good.
it good this time. Yeah.
Yeah. It
I
does
mean,
make it did.
just drink lots of milk, and maybe that'll prevent your skeleton from slowly eroding.
I will say, like, I did have moments where it was like Lester woke up and ate ice cream, and I was like, okay, Lester's kind of balling out, kind of jealous of Lester. But
Yeah.
I have to imagine it doesn't feel good to eat the sheer amount of food that he was eating, even if his body needs it. But who knows? Um, you have this parallel plot running now, and listeners, if you think we're introducing a lot of stuff, it's because this book just starts throwing
It's just
stuff
like
at you.
that.
Um, of this guy, Sammy, who works at Disney World, who is insecure because Disney World is behind. We were talking about this with the Disney World redesign, and he spends the rest of this book as like a semi-antagonist turned sort of uh ally. who will be like trying to sabotage them and try and do copyright strikes and just the bullshit Disney likes to actually do. Um, because he's like, oh, they've invented all this cool shit and I can't do it. But it's kind of a weird, like, I don't know, it's kind of an odd dynamic. And then it ends up being like, oh, actually, if you can't beat them, join them. I don't know. There's like some stuff there, but that's a thing that's happening. Then so that's like a conflict that's happening between him and the ride, while you have this new character, Death Waits, who is this kid who's goth, who sort of joins the team on the ride because he was fired or pushed out of Disney World because he was so angry at the firing of a lot of employees. You have that happening simultaneously while the ride cult is growing, and specifically like embodied by the character of Hilda, who is this like hot woman who wants to fuck Perry. And they meet at a bar where it says the girls were pretty and androgynous, and the boys were also pretty and androgynous. And I wrote, yeah, the future is androgynous, according.
Mm.
Yeah, I can definitely just like that also feels like Cory Doctorow coming through, just being like, damn, young people are so gay these days. What happened?
Young
Why
people
is
be
everybody
gay
so
as
gay?
hell.
Like he doesn't think it's bad, but you can tell that he's like, when did that happen? When did everybody start being gay all of a sudden?
Low-key gay with
Yeah,
it.
he comes at it from, I think he comes by it honestly, like there's some like stuff here that hasn't exactly aged well. Like there's a bit like he mentions a character like toward the end of part one that's like, oh, there was a rumor that this person used to be a man or still was under the
Oh
skirt, but I
yeah,
didn't really think about it. And I'm like, okay, this is, I guess this was progressive for 2009. Like,
right.
yeah, but like,
Um, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
no, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna ask, Max, I saw you got a little excited talking about Death Waits. I wanted to see
Yeah.
what, because this is it, there's so many lines here, and we're not gonna be able to follow in detail everything that happens. We're really just trying to get the vibes here. So talk about Death Waits a little bit.
Yeah, so this is going to require me to go on a tangent about myself,
Do it,
which I'm sure that
please.
everybody loves when you do that on a podcast, just part of sort of like, and this is my whole deal. But
Hey, we brought you on. Go for it.
yeah, I'm an avid, user of the internet. I've been quote unquote logged on since I was 9, and I started arguing with people in the comments of YouTube videos.
And
Instantly.
winning.
And
Love it.
and the thing that like really drew me to the internet was fandom. I was really into like cartoons and comics, and I like could realize that I could find all these people who shared my interests and talk to them, and there would be like, clips of cartoons, and I could watch like, stuff that was on like channels my family didn't have or stuff my parents wouldn't let me watch, like South Park or whatever. And there was just like this whole big exciting world out there and this whole community of people who were like me and they liked the stuff I did. And that like consumed my whole like life through my teenage years. And I drew fan art and I wrote fan fiction and I participated in fan forums and like, wrote like reviews as a hobbyist and like, maintained my Tumblr blog. And like I thought that like that was what I was gonna do for the rest of my life. Like I was just gonna like, go to conventions and hang out with other nerds and like talk about my interests. And then a thing like sort of happened, and it's funny because it has to do with this book a little bit. When I was 17 years old, I went to C2E2, which is a comics convention in Chicago, and just like sort of like a nerd convention, sort of a genre fiction thing. And that was when I went to the Cory Doctorow book signing, and gave him the little drawing that I made of Death Waits to sign. Um, and I remember like walking around there and just hit it. It like, when I was like in like middle school, like a lot of my interests were still pretty niche. My
Hmm.
interest in like internet stuff, in YouTube and fandom and cartoons, and it kind of became like increasingly mainstream and popular, and like conventions that had once been smaller and a little more sparsely attended had now become huge, and they all had these like really big corporate sponsorships, not just from
Hmm.
like, like the anime convention wouldn't just have like stuff from like, local businesses or whatever. Like it was all like, oh, like this big streaming service has all their stuff here and it's all like tote
Sure.
bags and merch. And I was walking around C2E2 and was just like, oh, this is just a shopping mall. Like
Hmm.
this
Yeah.
isn't like a community of people anymore. I could just like be like, this is just like a place where like I'm getting sold stuff and that's all it is. And I remember like feeling this profound sense of like sadness and disillusionment. And it reminds me of like Death Waits and what he goes through with Fantasyland, where like he comes to Disneyland out of this profound love for Disneyland and he works there and he kind of rises through the ranks there and he wants so badly to be a part of it and he realizes that he can't. I'm gonna pull up the quote now. Uh, and to be a part of it, to be an altar boy, if not a priest, in that magical cathedral they'd all built together in Orlando. But it hadn't been real. He could see that now. At Disney, Death Waits had been a customer and then an employee, cast member, he corrected himself reflectively. What he wanted, though, was to be a citizen of the magic, which wasn't a magic kingdom, since kingdoms didn't have citizens. They had subjects. And
Mm.
I quit writing fan fiction and I quit making fan art and I started being like, well, I want to do my own stuff and I want to make up my own stuff and share that with people and be in community with people around that. And I think that's kind of like something that Makers is about, like the struggle to do your own thing and make your own way
Yeah.
and like do
Literally
stuff
makers,
because it's
yeah.
interesting to you and not because it's going to make you money or make you successful or because even necessarily to sometimes like to build social connections with people or to get people to pay attention with you to you, but like to try to not do that in like the craven capitalist way. And the book
Mm.
is about like how great that feels when it works and how hard it is and how like scary and frustrating and sad it can be when it doesn't work out.
And I
Absolutely.
say how tenuous it is too, right? How
Yeah, how tenuous it is.
because you can make the ride and then it can get popular and then the thing happens again, right? You can go make your new convention and then once and you want to bring new people in, right? You can you or your new this, your new that, and you want to bring more people in. You want to make it popular. You want to be inclusive. And then
Yeah,
because of the system, not because any one person there is bad, or anyone's a villain necessarily, but because you exist in a system where like money makes things turn to rent this space, you have to have money to feed
yeah,
yourself to whatever. It becomes a money thing. And even when you try to avoid it, if people put stuff they love into it, for example, discarded Disney junk, all of a sudden, um, all of a sudden you're getting copyright strikes from Disney for just like trying to express yourself or just trying to like something
yeah,
because everything is so corporatized because it is a kingdom. So yeah, absolutely. Like that's actually the literal feeling I had just the other day. Or I guess a few weeks ago now, I was at Atlanta Pride, which is like this beautiful expression. Like it's beautiful, right? That like tens of thousands of people come out and are like, yeah, we're queer and we're proud. And like that's awesome.
yeah.
And that would not have been possible not that long ago. And yet, like, I don't know, BlackRock had a booth, and that feels bad. You know what I
Fucking
Yeah.
at Dragon Con, here in Atlanta, right? The fucking FBI had a recruitment booth like right around the corner from
Right.
where you play Magic. Like
Yep.
these things creep back in eventually. Disney creeps back in eventually, and it's like, okay, how can we do our version of this, right? Like it's all, and the whole time, like the trend grows, like people iterate on it, and you ramp up your consumption in a way that inevitably falls hardest on those who have to produce the things that keep it going, right? Like
Yeah.
they say, late in the book, autonomy makes us happy, right? But nobody who gets caught up in succeeding in this space is truly autonomous, right? If you're a fatkins, you have to eat 10,000 calories a day or you'll die. If you're doing this ride, you have to figure out how to keep it working when like 50 rides in Brazil open up and throw off the code, right? It's you get caught up in this machinery here, and suddenly like you're you know every detail of it can barbecue you in a way that you don't see coming.
Ryan, I saw you put something in the chat. You want to do a little input here?
Yeah, just to my contribution to mentioning every single one of our previous episodes this episode. We did talk a good bit about this in the creepypasta episode, especially when,
Yeah.
like how we were talking about the social capital that comes with it as well. And it's how we go from reading Jeff the Killer to Michael Bay's production company sponsoring Skibbity Toilet.
God, I remember the day that I like first saw a Jeff the Killer mask at a Spirit Halloween. And I was just like, what the fuck? Like, how did
You're
that get there?
kidding.
What is that
Wait,
doing there?
what?
Yeah, I think
Oh,
that
yeah.
actually they don't sell those anymore because the guy who claims responsibility for Jeff the Killer, like, I think, initiated some kind of legal action because they didn't actually like ask his permission to do that. They
Mhm.
thought of it as a thing on the internet that belonged to everybody, and they thought, whoever runs Spirit Halloween and makes masks, like they thought that that meant it was a thing that they could take and sell for money without asking anybody about it. Um,
Yeah, Jeff the Killer came for them, actually, was the crazy thing. He
yeah,
he did his twisted smile and he said, "Go to sleep."
He got
yeah,
his
but it
weird
was
comma
weird to
feeling.
see this thing that had existed as like like when I was a kid, like in middle school, like this was like a niche thing that like, adults didn't know about for the most part. It was this thing that existed on the internet and it was fun because you didn't know where it came from and it didn't belong to anybody or didn't seem
Hmm.
to at the time. And like it wasn't a thing that was getting sold to you. It was a thing that you could just like stumble upon.
Yep,
And it's like, well, then it became a mask that you could buy in Spirit Halloween, and then it like became, a copyright battle. And that's like the whole process that Makers is about.
absolutely. Listeners, I just want you all to be reminded the spirit of Ryan is always floating around. Even if you don't know he's on the episode, he's on the episode. He's waiting to pounce with a creepy pasta reference.
The
Thank you, Ryan.
specter of Ryan is
The
haunting the
specter of
socialist shelf.
so Disney, like we said, waging this legal war just because some of the like goth people put some of their stuff in the ride and it's technically copyrighted. So the rest of this, there's this ongoing legal battle back and forth, and they got to get the gang back together. They got to bring Kettlewell back into things. And just shit's happening at a very rapid pace. Perry goes on a little tour around the country. And then we deal with the greatest sex scene ever written.
Oh God.
Um,
Literally.
We have to talk about that though.
yeah, Lenore had an interesting take on the sex scene. Lenore, do you
So, I
Okay,
mean, I'm
to set it up, just to be clear, Hilda is like a woman who is like really into what they've done. She's setting up her own ride in her town, and then she's like, and she and Perry are like flirting, and they go back to Perry's hotel and they have sex. But then the sex scene, in Dr. Rao's words in the opening, is a real scorcher. I cannot believe he actually described it that way, but he did.
and I do think there's an intentionality in him drawing attention to it right at the beginning in the preface. Let me just pick out a paragraph here that's not
Oh
too
God.
cursed. Um,
It's all cursed. How many
It's
times
all
does he use the
cursed.
word opening? I hate
uh,
it.
Too many.
I
Her
hate it.
breathing became more regular, and she tugged at the waistband of his boxers. He got the message and yanked them off, his cock springing free and rocking slightly, twitching in time with his pulse. She smiled a cat ate the canary grin and went to work kissing his neck, his chest, hard bites on his nipples that made him yelp and arch his back, his stomach, his hips, his pubes, his
His pussy
thighs.
and his crack.
Yes, all of that. The
He arched
teasing was
his pubes.
yeah. You can do that when you're an entrepreneur like Perry. The teasing was excruciating and exquisite. Her juices dried on his face. The smell caught in his nose, refreshing his eros with every breath. For
Sucks,
three,
man.
for 3 pages, it goes on like that in excruciating fucking detail. And I'm certainly not defending the scene on its literary merit. I'm certainly not
No.
defending the prose by any stretch of the imagination.
You don't
But
like that twice he describes her as taking his dick to the hilt, and he uses that particular term to the hilt.
he,
You
he
don't,
his
you're not a fan of that on its literary merits? I
the
think that's really
the
good.
word perineum, is that not the most sexiest word to you? Is that not the most erotic part of the
I
human
don't want
body?
to launch a full defense of this scene because it's obviously so bad. I will say that I feel like it's hard to write a good sex scene. It's especially hard to write a sex scene that like does not seem a little bit ridiculous or embarrassing when taken out of the context of the story it's in.
Well, yeah.
But with that said, even by like I like tried to like come to this part of the book with as much generosity as I possibly could. And even with that in mind, like I still was just like, oh my God,
Yeah,
no,
because like
no.
the way that he breaks it down into such detail, I was talking to a friend about this, like it flattens the experience, right? It makes it something that it lays out almost like directions, and suddenly it's something everybody can do. I mean, it's written precisely the way to my mind, that his explanations of market dynamics and technology are written right. When
Yeah.
you reduce everything to its components, right, and the exchange value thereof, now there's no more intimacy, and everybody experiences it, and not everybody enjoys it, right? Like it's not something shared between people anymore. It's something traded. Like I mean, I can't do math. I can't code. Like, there's that one video of somebody using Magic the Gathering cards to make a Turing machine, and I see that, and my first thought is, I do not care, right? I know why
Yeah.
they were building it. It was to prove that the rules of Magic are so complex that they can result in an indeterminate game state, right? Just as this sex scene is reduced to just another process with an inertia and a function all of its own. But I don't want somebody's opening planted on my face in the process of getting there, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the bit where they eat a brick of cheese in bed, that's the that is the sexiest thing in this entire sordid procedure because it is different, right? It's something personal, and it's easy to gloss over it when you're still distracted by his refreshing arrows or whatever. But like, you stumble over that detail if you're a normal person. I think I stumble over it, and I consider myself, not out of the ordinary because it's personal. It's intimate in the way that the sex is not. But you're among people who might eat that brick of cheese and think nothing of it. These characters, right? These people make adding machines using brown M&Ms, which Van Halen had a very good reason for stipulating should be excluded. And they completely miss this reason because when you're deep in your grind set era, you fixate on tiny details for the wrong reasons and you miss the sex for the cheese.
I'm really a big fan of I always like when I'm dragging the still sensitive tip of the cock up and down the length of her vulva a couple of times
A couple of
before
times.
sawing it in and out of her opening, sinking to the hilt.
Yeah,
That's
I think you're definitely right when you're comparing the way that he writes the sex scene to like the way that he talks about like economics and technology.
yeah.
I don't know like why he thinks it's a good idea to do that or why this scene is really in the book at all. I don't know. Do either of you have any idea?
Okay,
I
so
mean,
I think okay, this is my thought process, right? She has this whole thing at the top right before the sex scene of like you got to live this rock star lifestyle. You got to go around and you got to just fall in love and then forget and whatever. And it's supposed to be this like crazy mind-blowing sex and then he can't forget about it because he has this experience that he can't forget. And I think it's supposed to be highlighting this like very intimate experience he has that he can't forget with this person and it wants to spend time on that experience and spend time going through it. And I think just he's like, well, here's I don't know. I
Here's all
think
the
it
cool sex stuff they did. Now you know
right,
why it was so great.
but that's the
right.
thing, right?
I
It's it's
guess, but
it's
maybe I'm sorry, I'm not trying to cut you off, Lenore, but like
yeah.
maybe it is as Lenore's talking, I'm thinking, is he intentionally doing the sex is the same as the is as the commodities as the entrepreneurship as
I
because
think he
that's
is.
interesting but I don't know that's
Yeah.
what's happening here.
Yeah, I don't know if he's doing it on purpose or if he just kind of can't help writing like that about everything, even if it's maybe not suited
Mm.
tonally.
I
Because
think
it
he
is
is though. Like
interesting.
it's he I think he's taking something apart and like the process of taking something apart destroys it, right? I mean, how does he sum up the scene here? That's what I like about you, Hilda, he said, Perry said. Business-like, vigorous, living life to the hilt. Okay, like so is
To the
everybody else.
hilt.
Yeah, living life to the hilt, just like she
Oh
takes
man,
his
not to the
cock, right?
hilt.
Like, I mean, so is everybody else in this space, right? Everybody's vigorous, everybody's businesslike, everybody's taking his cock to the hilt. Like
You know Lester is. Come on, you cannot say they didn't fuck once. They lived together. Never mind. Sorry,
at
go ahead.
some
Keep going,
point,
Lenore.
and because I mean, indeed, who was the last woman that Perry had any strong feelings for? Like Suzanne Church, right? Who
Hmm.
had the audacity to believe that the whole New Work thing might go somewhere, right? And it didn't play out that way, but she had faith in she had faith in this process and was documenting it and didn't have the same relationship that he did to it, but like I don't know. It's somebody whose life spun off and became something else, and I don't see any of that in Hilda.
It doesn't
Yeah.
help that Hilda then spends the rest of the novel being what she is, which is basically just like a groupie for Perry. Like,
Yeah.
There's multiple times where she gives his dick a companionable honk in the
okay,
and
that's real as fuck. I'm not gonna lie. That's
Yeah,
pretty cool.
actually, I was like, that's kind of real though. That is kind of what you do when you're in a relationship with someone.
I
I
mean,
don't know.
yes, you do give their dick a companionable honk, but like I I don't know. I just don't like it.
Yeah, yeah. as I said earlier, like it feels like Perry is being rewarded with a hot younger girlfriend for being so smart and such a good guy.
And
This
she
is
is a
this is
good
true.
bit younger than him too, isn't she?
She's like 10 years, I think, is what they
Yeah,
say.
it's not like a necessarily inappropriate, but she is a decent amount younger, and that is like
Yeah,
part of the
and
dynamic
they
too.
try to reference the fact that Perry is also notably younger, or not Perry, sorry, Lester is also notably younger than Suzanne. And
Uh-huh.
like, which we didn't really touch on this much, but like Suzanne has like this sort of long running crush on Lester, but never consummates it because she's weirded out by the fact that he's really fat. And then when he becomes thin, they can have sex. But like also like Lester has a lot of like residual hangups and insecurities
Mhm.
about the fact that she's attracted to him now and wasn't before. Anyway, but like you
That's
can't
way
really
more
turn that.
interesting to me,
Yeah,
too,
that's
to
way
be
more
clear.
interesting. I think that the dynamic between Suzanne and Lester where like it starts out as reporter and subject, and then like she drinks the Kool-Aid and she becomes intertwined with Lester and Perry's business, and then with them as people, and that's an interesting dynamic. And the dynamic with Perry and Hilda is not interesting, and also like unfortunately it just means a different thing
Yeah.
when an older man is pursuing a younger woman than it
Yeah.
does when an older woman is pursuing a younger man. And
Especially
also
because
like
she's a fan too. Like that's
yeah,
part of it too.
yeah,
Hmm.
like she's a fan of Lester and Lester is also a fan of her as like the
Mhm.
journal, and there's a give and take in that is not really there with the relationship with Hilda and Perry. It feels like more of a one-way street where like Hilda is yeah, a groupie.
No, sorry. I also think it's worth noting multiple times Hilda sets lines that then get crossed, and it's not like they get crossed non-consensually necessarily, because she then takes them back. But she says, "We're not having sex tonight, right?" And then they have sex, and you like know they're going to have sex, right? And it's not
Yeah.
like he makes her, like she initiates, but
She just
still.
conveniently changes her mind.
Right. And then she says, this is like a limited thing. But then like when he goes and tells her he loves her, that suddenly that's like they're good and fine and in a like in multiple times, like the boundaries she sets like aren't legitimate boundaries and like she's not being serious, which like on top of the dynamic, like I'm not a huge fan of. Again, like
Yeah.
I don't think it's wrong to depict someone saying something and doing something else, even in a sexual context. It's just when you throw it in the mix, especially of like how women are depicted in the book, specifically her, but like in general, and then you add the other character of the woman whose name I can't even remember, who just because Death waits gets beat up, she likes him.
Her name's Lacey, I think.
Yeah, and she has a
Hmm.
twin, and they both kind of want to fuck him.
Yeah,
Like
that dynamic is that's such a like that's so
total power
obviously like
fantasy.
fantasy, yeah, and like doesn't make sense. Like if one twin, he seems to only get with one twin, and the other one just disappears, and there's no hard feelings from the other one, I guess, which is like bizarre and impossible, and like I don't
Yeah, these
understand.
these aren't these aren't Leo Frankowski's twins who like to work as a team.
Oh
No,
God, don't remind me. I
I think that like actually I would have respected it more if Doctorow had just gone all the way and been like, yeah, Death Waits is in a semi-incestuous like polyamorous triad with these two goth girls, because then it's
Death
like
Waits
then you're
would.
committing to the fantasy that you're presenting.
Yes,
Let's be
yes. I
real. Death
actually
Waits would do that.
I actually do really
Yeah.
agree with that. And I wish, like, that's the thing. Like, he kind of brushes up against this thing and doesn't really go for it, right? Like, and it sort of subsumes that experience into the recurring dynamic of, yeah, these women are ultimately rewards for somebody who's sufficiently like entrepreneurial, somebody who's sufficiently like a trailblazer, right? And I can't help but think of, sex with Hilda in this context as well, right? She like there's bits in this book where people are like, oh, like is this like, can we mess with this without like crossing like copyright boundaries or brushing up against like this or that law? And then they're like, well, we can't worry about legal, right? We got paradigms to reform, right? And it's like, okay, like is she also like testing for is she also testing Perry for like somebody who will also like treat sex that way? But then that gets into really problematic territory. Like, I don't know, it's real messy.
It's really messy, yeah, and like in the Lester Suzanne relationship, like there's real push and pull, and they disagree with each other about important things. and they
Mhm.
have problems and they'll kind of like come apart and then come back together. But it seems like Hilda pretty much just agrees with Perry all of the time. And like if she seems to initially disagree, then she just like kind of is like, "Oh, actually, I thought about it, and you were right about that after all." It's just
Yeah.
like it's not a very well thought through relationship.
Yeah, but things continue. Um, the book, and like I said, a lot of things happen. A lot of things are being knocked around as they're working on the ride, and then there's like internal rivalries that erupt because Death waits, gets this pressure put on him. He gets put in a hard situation. He ends up actually getting the shit kicked out of him by like a guy that took the wrong instructions from Disney. He was supposed to be intimidate him. He hurt him anyway. Freddie, the journalist we were talking about earlier, the mean journalist, just starts writing shit about them and about Disney. You find out a little Freddie lore. You find out like, yeah, he's got a chip on his shoulder. He's actually been mistreated in his life. He's seen workers be screwed over. He does have something against the elites, but then it's like he's also against the people striving. He's also against the tech people. He's also against the workers. He's against everybody. So it's like okay to like dunk on him. And then things just kind of keep playing out as they have this prolonged battle that's becoming a legal battle and expands to other fronts and then sort of I guess like, Sammy kind of just has the Disney guy just kind of has a moment where he realizes, hey, I actually do like making rides and like I was like you guys at one point, and I actually don't really want to do it like this anymore. And it put they remain in this very tough situation. And you even have a moment where Perry is like seeing like the reasonable options of like the lawyers and the businessmen and Kettlewell. And he said, Ed, Perry knew it was reasonable, but screw reasonable. Reasonable is how good people ended up doing wrong. Sometimes you have to be unreasonable. And Perry really just ends up for the rest of the book kind of bucking the machine and not wanting to get nailed down by the money and the lawyers and the litigation, which will lead to Perry's inevitable, like the conclusion of his arc in this book, which is basically just being like a traveling tradesman who is like, just kind of gets by on seasonal work.
Yeah,
Um,
that's like the closest thing he can accomplish to really living outside the system.
right.
Mhm.
And it will, of course, it will culminate in a Disney buyout of their stuff and like giving them the opportunity to sort of innovate. And Perry leaves, Lester stays, and Lester becomes incredibly rich and kind of incredibly bored with the situation. But not before they all get together and pull like a grand prank on Freddie for some reason.
Yeah, everybody. I really felt bad for Freddie in sort of like his final moments in the book where it's just like, oh, a stipulation of this buyout is that like we get to fuck over Freddie and embarrass him in front of
Mhm.
everyone and ruin his journalism career. And I'm just like, no, he's not that bad. Like he has obviously like he's creepy to Suzanne and he's like very like he's got kind of like stalker tendencies when it comes to the new work people and his sort of relentless criticism of them. But also, like earlier on in the story, when Sammy tries to sell him on like, a pro Disney angle, he rejects it completely, showing that like he does have some principles. He's not totally just hateful for the sake of being hateful. He does believe in stuff. And he has like also fought hard to be where he is. So it kind of bugged me at the end to like see like everybody in the story, all of our heroes just take such glee in like crushing him completely.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's the last moment all these kind of heroes spend time together. Like, and you have like Kettlewell showing back up and being like helping them out with the money. And like, yeah, we didn't even really talk about like he has a wife and like kids, and then he's like not a great husband. So that and I'm gonna be honest, I don't really care very
no, that stuff's
much.
pretty boring.
Yeah.
Yeah, although I mean you do get a little bit of a glimpse into how the new work, the Fatkins, like the trends of this near future world really kind of like I mean, how so many kids want to be influencers, right?
Yeah.
It shapes them in that way, right? The little girl that Kettlewell has wants to be a Fatkins when she grows up, right? She can pronounce nationally ranked but not terrorists, because she's growing up in this environment where like the way to get to the top is to commodify yourself, right? Is to hop into this space and grind.
Right, yeah, like how kids now want to grow up to be Twitch streamers.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that represents like introducing the kids and introducing the subplot with Kettlewell, and like it does feel a little bit of the book losing its focus.
Yeah, it feels a little bit unfocused, and I don't think Dr. O writes children well.
No. And he does in his own admission, like the reason that he like, especially in like the late 2010s, wrote a lot of novellas is he says he feels like novellas are the best way for him to tell a story that he has
Hmm.
already fleshed out in his mind. And with a novel, he's like says he's when he writes a novel, he uses some term like I'm sitting down, going on like a journey, and I know where I'm gonna end up, but I'm like sailing an ocean and who knows what waves I'll crest. And I'm like, yeah, I get it, but it gets real. Like there's just it's just a lot of like stuff, and some of it's interesting and some of it's cool, and I
Hmm.
do appreciate it, but like it does like lose its focus a little bit here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is again, I'm reading the last bit of it and I'm like, well, what are we building toward, right? Because there is absolutely something there. Max, I think, pointed out earlier, you can't be a citizen of a theme park, right? The Magic Kingdom has subjects and not citizens. You get this trend, this innovation of an open source amusement park ride is, technologically it's intriguing, all well and good, but how are people interacting with it? What's being created here, right? It's something that you sit in a dark room and goon to, like, oh, remember this, right? It's I it's a form of interpassivity, like I mean, there's the whole Freddy thing is in conversation with, I think, criticism as art, right? Because it was 2009. What's big right now? Zero Punctuation's been around for a couple of years. You have the angry video game nerd. You have the nostalgia critic, for better or for worse with him, fucking. But like Freddy is a troll, yes, but at least he's creating something, right? At least he's got a turn of phrase. At least he's interacting with these people, however noxiously, right? And at least he has some sort of vision and ethos undergirding his career. How does the book end? By building robots of yourself that can play catch and perform this leisure activity for you. What did you accomplish there?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Max, you want to let people know how the book ends? Give like a little ending here because it's a little odd.
Okay. Honestly, as I said, I when I logged on, I finished reading the book today, and I had to rush through the end really
Oh,
quickly
no
so that I could
sweat.
go record.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like I did read it, but I don't know if I would give the best summary of it. I guess like it starts out like you get your epilogue where, Lester is sold out to Disney. He's very wealthy. He's also dying because the Fatkins treatment has had very deleterious effects on his health. And conversely, and Suzanne is married to Lester, or like they're still partners at least, they're still romantically involved. Hilda is gone in a way that's we don't know what happened to her.
As
Um,
mysteriously as she appeared, yes.
yeah.
There's a cute
And
like
Perry
marketer
is just sort of
lady.
like a traveling mechanic, I guess. And he's kind
Mhm.
of like untethered from the world and from normal society.
You have the line, Lester laughed and embraced his old friend, not seen or heard from these last 15 years. And I wrote, bruh,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah, the story ends very sadly in a way that kind of surprised me. Like they get this last little like moment to hang out, but
hmm
everybody's kind of grown apart and gone to do their own thing. Before the ending, Death Waits kind of tries to get involved with a project that Lester is doing, but he misunderstands it. He just wants to be a fan of the ride and for the ride to go on together, whereas Lester wants to keep doing new stuff.
hmm
And then after that, like they part ways, and we don't know what happens to Death after that.
Yeah, and you have, Lester talking about, well, what have you been doing? Because, obviously Perry's just like this broke traveling mechanic, working for other people. And Lester is like, well, I have a lot of money and I work here, but I can't really innovate. And he's like, and the individuals I work with are cool. Every single one of them feels the way I do. They all have cool shit they want to do, but they can't do it. It's like an
Yeah,
emergent property. Once you get a lot of people under one roof, the emergent property seems to be crap, which, that's a bummer. And then you have, yeah, they spend a little time together. They see a celebrity and neither of them knows who the celebrity is. They're old,
yeah,
they're
they're
out of
getting old.
touch. And then they build a little machine together and they're like, we're gonna work together and build little machines again and have a nice little time. And at the very end, Lester's going to bed and it ends on Suzanne as the book started. And I'll just read the end of the book here. She went to bed, but she couldn't sleep. She crossed to the window and drew back the curtain and looked out at the backyard. The scummy swimming pool she kept forgetting to do something about, the heavy grapefruit and lemon trees, the shed. Perry stood on the shed stoop, looking out at the night sky. She pulled the curtains around herself in an instant before he looked up at her. Their eyes met, and he nodded slowly. Thank you, she mouthed silently. He blew her a kiss, stuck out a foot, and then bowed slightly over his outstretched leg. She let the curtain fall back into place and went back to bed. Lester climbed into bed with her a few minutes later and spooned up against her back, his face buried in her neck. She fell asleep almost instantly. And then that's the end of the book.
That's the end of the book. We
I
finally got there.
I don't quite get it.
No, me neither.
Lenore, please tell me you get it, because I don't.
I'm struggling with it here, right? I mean, I the closest thing that I think I can pick out as a sort of thesis here. Lester asks her, how we get so screwed up. And she says, "Oh, baby, we're not screwed up. We're just people who want to do things, big things. Anytime you want to make a difference, you face the possibility that you'll, make a difference. It's a consequence of doing things with consequences, right?" And I don't know what exactly he's doing, right? Because as you say, he's been bought out by Disney. He's in a space where he can't really innovate anymore. He's doing the thing that he started the book doing, adding machines out of junk, right? He has an Apple II Plus made of skulls that plays Pong, right? Which, congratulations, you're working at Disney, the pinnacle of your nostalgia sphere, if spheres have pinnacles. And the best you can do is a memento mori in the shape of yesterday's tech running the day before yesterday's game, right? Computer made out
Yeah.
of skulls. Like, and then you go to sleep, and then, presumably you wake up tomorrow and you do it all again. Like, there's a bit that I thought to start the episode with, and we ultimately discarded, but it's still rattling around in my head, right? Where they're on a beach, and there's like it mentions Dade County beachcombers like looking for junk, right? And then it mentions, oh yeah, and then it Roombas away, and then you're like, oh, of course it's not a human doing this. It's a robot, right? And they the robots like scatter out of the way of Lester and whatnot. And it's like, wow, like even the concept of replacing human labor with machinery and taking off the drudgery has soured because these robots avoid they avoid human contact, right? There's robots earlier on that build jungle gyms, and they like nuzzle up to you when you touch them, and then these just like go away. The magic is gone, the interactivity is gone. You're reduced to this inner passivity where you receive something and there's no more warmth to it, and eventually somebody has to come along and just and shake you out of it.
Yeah, I think that like it is kind of a process of like the book is sort of showing this cycle of like, here's our new idea, here's the new dream, and then like having to kind of like watch that thing slowly be co-opted and taken apart and like watching it die. And the
Exactly.
hope is just that like it's gonna start over again and something new is gonna come out of the ashes. And I guess like the book ends on like this sort of uncertain note of like, is it over? Is it not over? Are we just like building like skull computers? Are we going to be stuck in the past forever, or are we not? It's not clear.
I mean, what is Susanna in the book doing? She writes a puff piece for Disney, ends up,
Yeah.
Mhm.
comes
And
around to promoting the most famous IP in the world, right? It's, I
also,
mean,
there's a brief implication that Disney has like conquered Iran or something.
Yeah, I don't know what's going
Like,
on when Sammy's calling in at the end or why he's
he's
in
like
Iran
he's the
exactly.
manager of the Iranian division. It says like building on the like wreckages of the war, and I'm like, oh, that's ominous. Uh, but it, I'm
also,
not.
like, she has a grand day out with Sammy, and I'm reading this like, have we forgotten that he hired a hitman to almost kill Death Waits?
Who
Yeah,
was
but
19 too.
that got Death Waits a goth GF. It's
Yeah, he
fine.
got pussy out of it, so ultimately he was fine. Actually, this is like not important at all. This is just me going back to my woke scold corner.
Do
Um,
it.
the
Do it.
every like principal important character in this book is heterosexual.
Mhm.
You get the one reference to the young people that Perry meets in Madison doing gay shit. You get the reference to the old woman who may or may not be trans, and also the hired guy who almost beats Death Waits to death has a boner while he's doing it, and that
Yeah.
point comes
Yeah.
up multiple times. And I don't know why
And
that's in
he
there.
calls, I don't know, Perry calls Lester the gayest straight man he ever met.
Yeah, there's a weird anxiety about like sexuality in this book that just like isn't that significant, but kind of pops up from time to time and is like amusing and interesting to me as a gay person reading it now.
I low key thought there was a moment where I was like at the end, I was like, Perry and Lester are gonna kiss at the end. If they
Oh
did,
man, if
I would have
only.
forgiven everything that I had.
5 stars, no
Yeah.
Because
notes.
you know what? It's something new, right? It's something unexpected that comes out of this thing that they've built, and something that they can, I mean, maybe they'll get into a boring like house husband sort of thing, but it's something magical to end on.
I don't know,
You know,
Lenore. One
yeah,
of them is pitching and one of them is catching at the end. So,
yeah.
am
Let's
I right?
go.
They make robots that throw and catch.
I
Good one, Jacob. Everyone applauds. No, I
appreciate
think,
you.
yeah, waving my rainbow flag off screen. No, it's on screen. No one can. No, there we go.
No, yeah, I can see it. I mean,
I
well, the
win.
listeners can't see it.
That you imagine it. I'm a hero for this. No, but they do like it's like, are they going to innovate? Probably not, because like the first thing they do on their new innovation journey is make like robots of themselves throwing a ball back and forth, which is like less creative on what they were doing at the very beginning and less interesting and less what I mean, it's kind of a nice, cute little thing, but it's also like, whatever.
Because the things that they make end up, the things that they make end up doing these things, right? I mean, what are they
Like,
doing?
why?
What are they doing? What are they doing right before? They're playing Calvin Ball, right? Where they have to make up the rules as they go along,
I
and
would rather
that's
Yeah.
the
that have
only
been the
yeah.
end. I think
Yes,
Yeah.
that's a
yes,
right.
actually, yeah.
Like, I think that's a better end because, like, where they end is Suzanne for some fucking reason, not doing anything, just looking at Perry and Ryan, I have no idea what you're talking about in the DMs right now. I do not
It's
know
the
what that
Zizek.
means.
I feel like it's pinging something in my brain, but I can't remember what.
Listeners, Ryan is saying it's the Zizek dildo speech, so make of that what you will. But uh, but like it's like, but it ends on Suzanne for some reason saying thank you to Perry, and he's outside, and then she snuggles up to Lester, and it's like, I don't know. It just feels like some stuff isn't sealed off, but it doesn't feel. I think he's doing something. I think he's cooking something that I'm not quite picking up on. I'm not even criticizing it. I just feel like there's something I'm like supposed to get here that I'm not. Not that there has to be closure or we have to know what happens to these characters. I
Hmm.
just mean, like, why is this the part where I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I think
y'all,
also like when with a novel that's so diffuse, the point where it stops is always going to maybe feel a little bit arbitrary and a little bit
sure.
incomplete because there are just like so many different threads and so many different ideas that this book kind of picks up and puts down at random. Um, that like there's maybe no ending to the story that's gonna feel totally logical or orderly or complete.
Mm,
Yeah, it's your American Psycho. This is not an exit, right? Like this is where he is, and like the point is that it's a dynamic that he can they can do almost whatever they want in, and that's the tragedy of it, right?
mm.
Because it's again, we don't get a picture of the impact that this whole new work thing that these um calculator slinging entrepreneurs, like we don't get a sense of the impact that they have on the larger world, and that's part of the horror, I think.
Except they can 3D print AK-47s.
That's
They
true.
can do that. This book is so in love with the idea that a 3D printer could 3D print another 3D printer.
It is really excited about that.
I don't
Um,
really know what's so just it seems like
Stealth.
you're gonna get successively. Does the other 3D printer that you just printed out, does it also print out 3D printers? And are those worse 3D printers? Or do they manage to maintain the quality? Never mind. I shouldn't be thinking about this. It's not
Max, the
important.
future is now.
Teach a man to fish.
Teach a man to fucking fish. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Well, at the end of the day, I did have a good time reading this book. I
Yeah,
enjoyed this
I liked
book.
it a lot. I was expecting to revisit it as an adult and not as like a high schooler and like feel I was expecting to have cooled on it more than I did. I actually like liked it a lot and enjoyed the experience of reading it a lot, even though obviously I have narrative complaints and I
Mhm.
have my designated woke scold complaints. Um, but like
Yeah.
it's not boring. It's very interesting. It raises a lot of interesting ideas. It's very prescient about some things.
Hmm. And I mean,
And
Yeah.
it shows that like Doctorow says that like Kim Stanley Robinson is a massive influence on him. Like you can see that. I think Kim Stanley Robinson is a little bit better at what he does than Doctorow is, at
Well,
least
because
given this
again,
book as a
like
sample size.
it's Robinson himself turning to the reader and saying these things. Like he just devotes entire chapters, Victor Hugo, like to expositing these things, right? It does violence, I think, to the characters themselves. I mean, not that you can't have characters themselves expressing these ideas, but like it's when I think of For the Win, right? I think Doctorow himself refines that craft after this book.
Nevertheless, despite it all, I appreciate what he's going for. I appreciate the most of the undergirding principles. I obviously appreciate his politics. I appreciate his commitment to, a free and open internet with sharing information and not locking everything behind walls. And hope that I hope that the decade 15 years I guess now intervening between now and coming forward is better for the internet than the last 15 years since this book came out has been. That's for sure.
Well, maybe
uh
we'll make versions of ourselves that can be even more insightful than we.
so true.
yeah,
Do y'all have any final thoughts on this before we wrap this up here?
I mean, I had a good time with it. Didn't quite refresh my eros, but
didn't quite
it
refresh my arrows. I yeah, I liked the book a lot. It is funny to I don't know. It's funny to like I don't know like what drew me to it so much as a teenager. Like I sort of do and I sort of don't. And like the book has a pull for me that like both is about like, consigns like the things about the book that like interest me thematically, but I'm also just like very drawn to these characters and their whole deal and their connections
Mm,
for some reason, even though they're not always especially well written or well thought out.
mm,
I don't know, like
absolutely.
there's a bit in the movie Inland Empire where the Laura Dern character is talking about like a circus performer and like a crowd, and he's like he did some kind of thing on them. And every time
Mhm.
I read like reading this book, I was just like, damn, he did some kind of thing on me.
Yeah,
Like
done
I
something.
chose this book to talk about because like
Mhm.
it's just like I'm really drawn to it, even though it's like kind of maybe not that great.
But
Absolutely.
it does some kind
It does some kind of thing on you.
it does some kind of thing, and we're all creatives here, like there is
Yeah.
something here in taking what you've consumed and experienced and thought and the act of recombination inherent in synthesizing your experiences into something else, right? Again, what is writing, I think, but expressing yourself in a way that only makes sense to you, and hoping other people get something out of it. What is writing a good sex scene but writing something that only you could have experienced and trying to express it to somebody else, right?
Yeah. It's not a good sex scene though. But it's a very Cory sex scene. It is a sex scene that only he could have written. And
That's
I
true.
did I did laugh reading it. I certainly
That's
like it
true.
got a reaction out of me. So I guess I'll
That's
give it
true.
that.
Well, speaking of something people write, Max, we mentioned it earlier. You have a web comic. Tell us a little bit about it and tell us anything that you might want to plug at the end of our episode here. We really appreciate you coming on and want to say that like people should check out your stuff. So tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, thank you so much for having me on. So I have a webcomic called What Happens Next about death and the internet and the Midwest. And is sort of like well, it has you can read it on my Twitter at Maximum Graves. I'm Maximum Graves, all lowercase, no spaces, on like Twitter, on Blue Sky, on Instagram, on Tumblr. And you can read my comic either on Twitter or on the website whathappensnext.webcomic.ws. I hope that I don't know.
It'll all be
Um,
linked. It'll all
It'll
be
all be
linked in the
linked, right?
episode.
Yeah, and I have a Patreon where people can give me money to support the continued production of my work
Mhm.
if they want to. And that's pretty much it for stuff I want to plug. Yeah,
Give Max money.
give me
All of
money.
it.
Yeah,
I agree. I
$1
agree.
million.
Well, Max, I really appreciate it. And as we end, I just want to say, you could you could make money through Patreon, but I have this really cool enterprise I'm thinking of. We're going to fund a bunch of little web comics that are gay about the Midwest and about death and the internet. And then we're going to have them work together. And it's actually going to create an autonomous network where, and yeah, somebody just like yank me off the stage with like a cane.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, everybody. Thank y'all for listening to this episode. And
out.
yeah, peace out.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Socialist Shelf Radio.